Witnessed as they've been walking through these different houses, these different communities, babies, their heads cut off. That's what they said. Gunned down, families completely gunned down in their beds. You can see some of these soldiers right now comforting each other. Many of them reserves who jumped into action, leaving their own families behind as well, not knowing the sheer horror that they were about to come to. They say they've never experienced anything like this. This is nothing that anyone could have even imagined.
All right, welcome to the latest episode of Blood Money. Blood Money episode 167 with a variety of very special guests today, starting with John Petrick, Joshua Abraham, Juan O'Savin's going to be joining us soon, Tim Lastly, Joey Gilbert, LW, Nephi Kaliki, Paul Laramie. Did I miss anyone? I don't think so. How y'all doing?
Doing great.
Good.
How you doing?
Doing really good, man. Thanks for having me on.
We got another guest, Courtney Turner. Hey, how you doing, Courtney? I don't know if you could hear us, but anyway, we're putting on this very special episode of Blood Money because of the carnage you can. Awesome. We're putting on this very special episode of Blood Money because of the carnage that has been happening in Israel and the Middle East. You guys saw the 2-minute video we put together in terms of really what's happening on both sides, war, massacre, whatever you call it. So I wanted to get all of you guys into this roundtable so we can talk about what's going on, where this is all going. Are we looking at World War III? Some would say World War IV. Is this the beginning of the end? Is the world about to erupt? We've seen that there's literally war everywhere, conflict on the streets here, threats of civil war over here, genocide happening in Armenia, war, massacre, terrorism happening in Israel. So the world pretty much seems to be at a boiling point at this point. So why don't we start this off? I'm going to pose a question. Whoever wants to dive in and answer it. Where is this all going?
We should call on somebody.
All right, Nephi, why don't I just call on you, brother? Why don't we start with you?
Well, I think the worst thing about this is it is really going to force people into taking sides. And anybody who's going to not take the side of Israel is going to be associated with, Nazis. And anyone who takes the Palestine side is going to be associated with terrorists. It's a lose-lose situation politically and from a public relations standpoint. Right now, they're both just claiming to be the victim. But the truth is this conflict goes all the way back to Jacob and Esau in the Bible. That, one guy got the land that he was supposed to get from his father, and the tensions have just sprang from that. But there's no way to trace it back to who started it. And that's really all they're saying right now. is he started it, and it's the most childish blame game. But it's not going to look good because there's our Jewish communities are everywhere, and it's going to force people into conflict that we don't need. But I hope we find a way around it. I do think it'll probably hurt the Democrats more because they're going to be on the side of people that they're chopping the heads off of babies. We know they like to abort babies, but not like that.
Yeah, Tim, give me your thoughts on what's going on, where this is all going, who's at fault.
Well, apparently, it's the relocation of the Jews into Israel or Palestine back in 1947. That's pretty much what started it all. I mean, I think that there could have been a better way to do it, but obviously they did it for this reason alone. But right now, like what I'm seeing over the horizon is this is the way that they're gonna implement the draft, and it set up America to be just led to the slaughter. Like Harrison was saying on the American Journal today. I mean, this is literally the worst case scenario. And not only that, but there is so much animosity and anti-American Muslim factions and everybody else that it's just going to be bedlam inside the United States for decades if this actually sets off to where Israel annihilates Palestine. I think what should happen is that there should be I'm hoping for a ceasefire. I'm hoping for level heads to prevail, but ultimately I don't think that's going to happen since it's been like 1,000-year blood feud. So
yeah. LW, thoughts?
Well, I think the world stage has been set for quite a while now, and it's on a very destructive path. My concern is how weak we look on the world stage with the current administration. We got a guy who can't even find his way off of a stage, let alone put together any kind of defense for America or anyone else. We're supposed to always have Israel's back. He came out and stated that, and then kind of went off on one of those, I don't know. I mean, how does that look to the rest of the world? We have nobody who can stand up and be firm on any of this stuff that's on the world stage right now. And I think it really makes us weak. My concern with some of the information that came out earlier today, and I mean very, very credible information that's coming out, that we really need to just pay attention to what's going on in our own country right here, because everything that's happened on the southern border, these people are coming across the border unchecked, and now the concern is they're going to hit us here at home. And frankly, I'm as concerned as everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I heard recently was that even if a very small, less than like 0.1% of the people coming in illegally are actually have nefarious ideas, I mean, we're in big trouble. We got a whole lot of terrorists and terrorist cells in this country right now, if that is the case.
I would agree.
John, brother. So tell me, what do you think about all this stuff that's going on?
Obviously it's frightening. I agree with what everybody has said. You sit back and you're almost in disbelief that this is happening. Obviously, with the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, that weakened us and showed everybody how weak we were. China's now looking to enter Taiwan. I think they said I can't imagine how many terrorists have already crossed our southern border. I think they did this as a plan. I watched something that was talking about in March of this year, how China, Iran, and Russia had something planned for us. So that certainly is scary. What's most scary is that half of our population is in denial. They're not even, regardless whether they're on Israel or the Palestinian side, they're in denial that this is even happening. They're watching Thursday night footballs and Monday night football. I don't think anybody's aware. I'm almost to the point where you're either going to be not on one side or the other, but the informed or the not informed. And that's what it's going to come down to. And I certainly know, the one gentleman mentioned he was buying a ranch and preparing. I'd like to know where that is.
That's a perfect segue. So Joshua, I mean, you've been on the Blood Money podcast. You've raised a lot of concerns about what's coming down the pipeline. Just to sum it up, I mean, we both seem to agree that the world seems like it's falling apart, and you're preparing, you're doomsday prepping. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and your perspective on all that's happening right now.
Just getting ready for it, man. Because honestly, when this shit goes down, it's just gonna be, who's prepared and who isn't. Because honestly, this whole situation over there, you can look at it any way you want, but I'm just going to go right off what Tim said. It's all Israel's fault with their occupation over there in Palestine. They got no right to be there. And even the Orthodox will tell you, even in their own scriptures, they're not even supposed to be there until their Mashiach arrives. They know what the scriptures are saying. They know what they're not supposed to be there. That's why the Orthodox and the Zionists are always butting heads. But apparently, Rothschild and his thugs, just wanted to set up shop down there. And with everything that's going on right now, people, just like what Nephi was saying, like, if you choose Israel, you're this. If you choose the Palestinians, you're that. And we're going to see a lot of that. But it just comes down to, if you just read and you know what happened, if you just know what happened, it's really not up for debate who's in the fault here, because we know it's the Zionist fault. Like, we know, if you read the Protocols of Zion, that book that was published in 1903 with their point-by-point agenda, this whole scheme that they've been running with the open borders, with all the debt and the sexualization of children, this is all in the Protocols of Zion. And with a triple prong effect with Ukraine and China and Taiwan and this whole Israeli thing just kicking off, I think it's a perfect storm to really, slam home what they're going to try to do in the end. Because according to what I've been told, and, we don't have much time left. We just don't have much time left. And so I'm just doing everything I can to prep, get ready, be self-sustaining, get off the grid, get me some chickens, some gardening going. Like, yeah, I'm setting up shop over in Fredericksburg, between San Antonio and Austin, up in the wine country, and setting up my ranch up there.
Thank you, Joshua. Courtney, so I'm glad we have a lady amongst 8 men. Thank you for joining us. I'd love to hear your perspective on this story.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm hoping you can hear me. I'm in the car. I'm driving down to Miami, and I'm speaking at the Reawaken tour on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, if you can hear me, just let me know.
We can.
We're good.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yep.
So I echo a lot of the sentiments that I'm hearing. I mean, my biggest concern is that this is really setting up to position for World War III or IV, as you were saying. I would argue IV is probably more accurate. I think the thing is that a lot of people didn't think that there would be kinetic warfare, and it's really looking like, we might be headed in that direction. They're doing everything possible to engage Americans. And we see that with, like, Biden, of course, has to say we stand with Israel, but on the other hand, he's giving billions of dollars. So this is typically what happens, right? They fund both sides. And a lot of you made reference to the Zionists. And of course, that's what they did. The Balfour Declaration was funding both sides of the argument. And they lost that, and Israel got the independence. But my big concern is, one, World War III, IV, whatever number you want to call it, and that it is going to go kinetic. The allies of Iran are China and Russia. That's exactly what they want to engage. And my other concern is really that because a lot of people don't know the history, the anti-Semitism is rabid, and people are blaming the people. And that is the opposite. I keep saying, if we are going to, because they create these managed dialectics in order to pit people against each other. And that's how you create the divide and conquer. That's how you create the chaos that leads to the destruction and the death that they want to see. And I think that if we're going to play any dialectic, it should be Team Humanity versus this parasite class, who's trying to create this neo-feudal type of, I think they want it to be an AI technocratic takeover with a high-borg mind that they program, leading us to a post-human world. Wow. But if we could really take the side, that's where I see it going, at least from their own words. Exactly. But I think that people need to really try and take the position of the people, because it's really people who are being victimized, and people's passions are being played. So people are trying to take sides as if it were a football game. And while certainly there's, I think the sides are really the governments of all seem to be very much complicit. And, I've been watching a lot of these releases from like the people who are either former IDF or former intelligence, and it does seem like, and just my own intuition, it doesn't seem like there's any possibility that they were completely unaware. And now we have some, reveals that they did have some warning. So it sounds a lot like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, where there was some sort of awareness. So again, it's the government, and we saw this through COVID, where, in my opinion, that was democide against the people of Israel, against their own people. So I not to sound like, I don't know what you'd call it, but yeah, my heart is really just going towards people, and I don't want to see this escalate where it's going to be on American soil or Americans are going to be involved.
Yeah. You know what? One of the things I wanted to mention, we had this documentary playing all day today about how this all started. I mean, I've been curious myself. I mean, we could go back to, thousands of years, like Nephi was saying, biblically, where the original conflict started. But if you look at the recent conflict, it was really because of the Balfour Declaration and the British basically lying to both sides. They told both sides, hey, you're going to have the land of Palestine. Actually, the British and the French, one of them promised the Arabs the land, one of them promised the Jews the land. And really, it was the British Empire, as usual, that got us into this pickle by basically lying to both sides, more or less. I mean, especially the Arabs, telling them that they're going to get those lands. But Joey, how you doing, sir?
Good, man. I'm doing real good. I'm just, I'm kind of in a spot here where, some of us that were always considered the supreme conspiracy theorists, 4 or 5 years later, when every single thing you ever said has now come true. Yeah. It's like, what's just horrifying and just deeply disturbing to me is just the loss of life on both sides. Yeah. I mean, there's just no excuse for children, women, elderly, and the people caught in the middle that have nothing to do with this. I mean, at the end of the day, there's obviously powers that be at play here. You just can't ignore that. You can't have been living and breathing and sucking air in this world the past 4 or 5 years and think for 1 second that this is, by happenstance. I just can't. And I'm not trying to say that this has been planned out, but I mean at the same time, come on, like the Russia war wasn't working. To the way they needed it to, who's the number one ally or supposed to be our number one ally in the Middle East? Where's an absolute surefire reset that you got to rush into? And again, they're not going to do anything, small. They're going to go in and murder babies and chop off heads and just do the most atrocious. It's almost like we've been rewound to when ISIS was let loose, funded, trained, and then let loose. And it came out later that that's what it was. So as much as I, don't want to sit here and pretend like I know, I just have a good, gut feeling that hasn't been wrong yet since, everybody on here hasn't been fooled since, March 2020, when we sniffed it out, very early on that this was all a bunch of bullshit. And so now, the thing, like I said, that's most heartbreaking is you look at the Palestinians, they're literally landlocked, in a spot where they can't move. Now they're shutting off their water and power. And I'm telling you, like, people chanting in the streets, there are innocent women, children, elderly families that have nothing to do with this, want nothing to do with this. And they're going to be used. The collateral damage for this is so heartbreaking. And so for me, I'm sick to my stomach as a father, seeing people carry, young children out, seeing fathers crying, that's stuff you can't hide. And I think you're absolutely right. I don't know who said that, on, the banking families, the Rothschilds. Yeah, absolutely. Someone is sitting back, kind of going like this, saying, yeah, this is exactly what we wanted to have. The outrage is exactly what we wanted it. The U.S. is going to cut blank checks. They're going to send their aircraft carriers and their people over here. And, if you want me to take it a step further, I think this ultimately leads to the War Powers Act, because everything they're trying to do to stop Trump is not working. They can't push the trials up fast enough. They can't break any more constitutional, rules of law against this man to try and get him out of the election, because they know if it was to happen today, it's over, you know, and they lose, and these people will never cede power. They will do whatever it takes. As many women, children, and old and elderly and families that need to die, they don't care. And so at the same time, you know, like I said, I'm not going to sit there and say I know, but I've seen this before. You know, we've all seen this before, and it's heartbreaking because no one wants to see this. And I'm on anyone's side. I'm on the side of, you know, of humanity. This is absolute, you know, destruction of humans and human rights, you know, crimes that we've never, you know, imagined possible happening again in the modern world. So for me, I'm heartbroken for the families and the people over there. And when I hear something like, you know, Israeli prime ministers and people saying we're going to wipe Gaza off the map, as much as I'd love to see, or Hamas off the map, as much as I'd love to see terrorists be wiped off the map, it's not just terrorists you're talking about. It's people that are caught in the middle there. And it's like I said, for me, I'm human to human, just sick about it. And who knows what's going to happen, because as I said, there's no slowing down of the rhetoric. There's no backing up. They have to do this to secure their stranglehold on the world. Their pandemic flopped. Their World Economic Forum nonsense flopped. That Klaus Schwab needs a beating. They all need a beating, right? And at the end of the day, like, this is what they're going to do to get back at us. And those of us, and letting people on here, I mean, she's headed to the Reawaken Tour. The people that sounded the alarm and woke up this country, all of us that were here speaking at school boards, speaking at county commissions, suing governors. Sure, we didn't win a lot of stuff, but we woke people the hell up and we stopped their plans. So here's, you know, this is probably plan C, plan D, plan E, plan F. I don't know what it is. I just know it's not good. And for those reasons, I think, you know, last thing I'll comment on is I'm scared to death about that. You know, no one's been paying more attention to the southern border than the group on here, especially you, Vem, and sending, you know, our brothers down there and taking a look, Travis, you know, and we know we've got good friends that have been on that border. You don't even want to think what's crossed that border. And we know, because we saw them coming over here, and to hear these guys calling for a holy day of jihad on Friday, you know, I just hope everybody on this show right now is putting extra ammo and weapons in their vehicles and just being ready, because I really do think, you know, again, not conspiracy theorists, that someone's going to do something, and I sure as shit ain't going to be standing there holding my pecker.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's Joey, very, very well said. Yes. You know, one of the things that really we've heard over and over again from Michael Young, who's been at the border pretty much nonstop since this all started, is that there's people crossing the border that are clearly killers, like guys with like eye drop tattoos, guys that I used to see in Los Angeles growing up. And it took the LAPD about 10 years to get rid of that element. They pushed them off into Riverside and, you know, San Bernardino County. And before LA was like, you get drive-by shootings every single day. It took them about 10 years to clean it up. And the fact that they're bringing these kind of individuals back in, but in the hundreds of thousands and millions, I mean, we have to expect that something serious is going to happen. And Michael Yon seems to think that we're pretty much going into war, that a lot of these young men are going to be militarized against us, that they are coming here literally to rob us, kill us, take our homes. That's what Michael Yon says. Paul, let's get your thoughts, brother.
Speaking of the border, I watched 3 to 4 hours of footage today of young men, 16 to 43 years old, Somali, Syrian, all gentlemen, no women, no elderly, all fighting housing tents at the border. The park police was present. They allowed them to cross the street, but I watched them flood hours. And these are countries that are hotbed, right? So the fact of the matter is in Ukraine.
Yeah. Paul, your audio's cutting out big time, brother. Your audio's cutting out big time. Is there any way you could double check on your Wi-Fi, because every other word's getting cut out?
Give me 1 second.
Sure. Let me go.
Hey, Vem.
Yes, sir.
Just real quick, I just got word. I got people messaging me saying that Israel just invaded Gaza.
Oh, wow.
So I thought I'd let you guys know.
Wow. And then, you know, we're hearing other things like Hezbollah sending drones. Hezbollah, I don't know if somebody's audio's off, but anyway, Hezbollah sending drones through Lebanon. So it seems as though there's engagement in Lebanon. Anybody that knows about Lebanon, by the way, these documentaries that we posted today, you can find on our channel. are incredible to check out because they actually tell you about how Lebanon used to be very balanced as far as the Christian and Muslims, but then because of all the Palestinian refugees that were kicked out of Israel or left Israel, they flooded into Lebanon. There was a whole new class of essentially militants created. First it started with the PLO, then it became Hezbollah, and really they are the armed forces that run Lebanon, and that happened pretty much because of what we would consider illegal immigrants, right? So lesson to learn there. This was a country that was at peace that went into civil war because an imbalance was created, because frankly, a multicultural element was introduced to something that wasn't in their culture at the time, that then led to civil war. And a lot of people are saying that same thing's going to happen here.
You know what, Vam?
Yes, sir.
It's probably important to discuss. Gaza Strip is it's a self-contained ghetto. Mm-hmm. And they don't have resources. They're cut off from so much. And to look at the organization from a tactical perspective and the coordination and the timing, there's no way they did this on their own. Mm-hmm. And so what's going to propel that into another direction is when it starts coming out. And we know it's probably Iran. But when that starts coming out, then the shit's going to hit the fan even worse, and now you've got their allies and enemies interfacing with that, and that is I don't think it's just hyperbole, but to say that's very much how World War II started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you look at the roots of this. The roots of this, just to clarify what I was saying earlier, for people that don't know, is what was happening was that in World War I, the British were losing. The Allied powers were losing. They were losing badly. They were getting the piss beat out of them by Germany, right? And it's because of a deal that the Prime Minister of England made in order to essentially propagandize the American public into having the Americans join the war, because that was the only way that they're going to ultimately beat the Germans. If the Americans hadn't joined the war, Germany would have won that war. History of Europe would have been very different, right? But they went, essentially the U.S. Zionists said, look, if you could help to convince the Americans, we'll promise you Palestine, right? Now, the thing that's really messed up about all of that, they're promising the same thing to the Arabs too, because they needed to use the Arabs at the same time. So they're using both sides to their benefit for their empire, while they're cutting up the Middle East how they want to cut it up, not according to what the locals want, right? Ignoring cultural lines and all that stuff. Hence, you have, Kurds stuck in Iraq like 100 years later looking for their own land, right? And so, this seems to have been a British invention. And so the question I asked here in terms of the British role in all of this, today, we're noticing all sorts of tyranny that are happening in the United States as far as violation of our freedom of speech, limitations of press. And again, this seems to be a European influence. What Michael says is that this is all primarily England, but a lot of European influence trying to influence our culture and the way we do things here. So what do you guys think about that? What do you think about, the source of this issue is really, comes back to, British Empire. Courtney?
You talked about how they had to sway the popular opinion. And I've done a lot of research on Tavistock, which comes out of the UK. It's now known as the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And that became Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in 1948. Around 1946 it started, but I think officially 1948, and that was under a grant from Rockefeller. But the original started at the Wellington House, and that was under the Crown, of course, with funding from Rothschild, Milner, the same people who started the Balfour Declaration, and actually headed up, and the whole purpose of it, it was called the British Propaganda Bureau. And they did it because Germany had a propaganda bureau, so they did it in the name's defense. And the purpose of it was to sway the popular opinion of the Britons and the Americans to engage in World War I. They set up a commission. It was called the Creel Commission. Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann were appointed to head up this Creel Commission in the United States to sway the opinion in favor of engaging in the First World War and to take the side of the Brits, to take the side of the British, and to advise Woodrow Wilson. One of the things that they did was weaponize, a lot of people know today they've weaponized the term conspiracy theorists, right? They did that in document 1035-960, Countering the Warren Commission, to avert any investigation into JFK's assassination. And this way, they just labeled them as crazy conspiracy theorists and hope that people would not do any further investigation. Well, they weaponized the term, so anybody who wanted to just mind their own business, and we saw the replay of this with Ron Paul, right? Ron Paul was gaining a lot of popularity with the political right, and so the way that they discredited him with this in more recent times was to resurface this word isolationist. So I think that very much this is, an empire attempt. It's an extension. I actually didn't know too much about a lot of the British role, and I started diving into in terms of like the Balfour Declaration and the state of Israel. And it does seem like this was really just to create an outpost for them. Carol Quigley talked a lot about that. And revealed a lot of what their plans were there. And what they actually, as you said, they played both sides, which is what they always do. Just like the First and the Second World War, right? They funded both sides. Either way, they win. And you see this with the secret societies too, right? And it's because if you have a dialectic, then what's the result of the dialectic? It's the sublation, negation, which then progresses the dialectic towards their teleos, and that's, of course, for them, the teleos is depopulation as well as to control the remaining population. I do think this is part of their plans to escalate to some sort of I think they want to have a third world war.
They want a third world war, yeah. LW, I'd love to get your thoughts on some of this in terms of, is this all part of one big plan, coordinated plan, or are we being, conspiracy theorists here and thinking that what just happened is part of this coordinated plan?
I think conspiracy theorists, what's the saying? It just takes a little bit of time and it becomes conspiracy fact. So what I want to piggyback on what Courtney just said, because in those times in World War I, the propaganda was written documentation, right? They flooded the newspapers, they flooded all kinds of things to get people emotionally charged and engaged into supporting World War I. What you're seeing today is you're seeing social media. When I saw the pictures of the babies and some of the other stuff that's been going around the internet for the last couple of days, I have to step back for just a minute. I'm not saying that stuff is not real or it's not happening, but they are using that as a device, as a tool to get America charged emotionally so that we will fund a war and send our young men and women over there to join this war. And you're seeing that unfold right before our eyes. This is going to be something that is, it's going to be huge.
On that, sorry, LW, to interrupt you real quick. I'll let you continue right now. But on that point, there was one video that we put in our intro video where it was a lady talking about the beheaded babies. And after we had actually posted that, because, we thought it was a completely real story, that's why we put it in the video. Then I got a message after showing it around a little bit saying that lady came out and said that was actually not correct information. So we haven't actually seen actual babies with their heads chopped off. We've seen a lot of horrible things, and some of which were in that reel in the beginning, like bags of dead babies. So, we have to be careful because, yes, the idea of anybody chopping a baby's head is like you want to go and murder that person and whatever they stand for. That's your automatic reaction. But they're trying to get us, both sides are trying to get us emotionally infuriated and supporting both sides. They want you to be either 100% Israeli or Israel, 100% Palestine. And that seems to be a polarizing position and something that's just going to get us into more problems.
Well, if you think about it, when 9/11 happened, it got everyone emotionally charged. I remember being 26 years old when that happened. I was ready to go down and sign up for the Marines or the Army. It didn't even matter what branch at that point. I was ready to go to war. And I think that's what we're going to start seeing unfold here too, is they're going to really pander to our emotion, and people are going to get sick at the stuff they're going to see on television. They're going to get angry. This is going to just spread like wildfire. And I caution people to really try to unplug from that emotional trigger, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for Americans to get angry. And my concern is what Putin has said, where they're going to support Palestine. So if we're supporting Israel, they're going to support Palestine. What's going to happen in the middle? We're already on the edges, the fringes in Ukraine with Russia. We're sending equipment over there. We're sending $130 billion to the Ukraine to fight this war. I mean, to me, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when we get involved.
Wow, John, John Petrick, you've been running for office. You're very involved in the community. You have a good pulse about what's going on out there. I mean, what's your thoughts in terms of how people are going to perceive this and where this is all heading based upon all this emotion that's being infused into our culture?
Well, it's certainly being talked about, and you're seeing both sides being represented. Some people are, again, as I stated the first time, you're having people choose sides. And I think that's what you're doing. And again, you're furthering the divide. To Joey's credit, he preached and out there better than anybody in regards to the anti-vaxxing, with the frontline doctors and stuff. And so you saw a separation from the vaccinated. As a physician, I sense it every day. You can obviously, when you're alone with the patient, you can hear their voice, what they're saying, how they're leaning. Some patients like, hey, I just got my second vaccine or my booster. And other patients are coming in saying, they'll kill me first. I'm never getting it. So you take that same thing, and like you said, the big thing is that they try to push us anti-vax, anti-mask versus each other. And now they're doing that now, Palestinian, that. But I will say, I really think that this is all part of the plan in regards to the dumbing down of our society. Most people don't know. I think they're so caught up into their TikToks, into their social medias, that they're blinded by this. So at the same time, even though I'm hearing a certain segment of people on each side, I still see these sheep totally convinced that this is just a normal day. It's happening over there. It has no impact on what's happening here. I'm not going to choose a side because they're ignorant. They don't know history. They don't understand all of the stuff that you just stated about Britain and its influence and its infiltration with the Masonic Lodge and all of the other, all the other factions that are out there that are bad. But the right now on the street, people are still concerned about their wallets. So if you really want to know the truth, they're concerned about, this transgender thing, which is part of that whole big issue. People are pissed about it. But then I went to a school board meeting and one of these other meetings, and the parents were there, and they're saying how mad they were. And I said, I don't believe you. And like, oh, no, we're mad. And I'm like, I'm sorry. You may sound it and you may say it, but I don't believe you're mad enough, because why aren't you following these bastards to where they're eating? Why aren't you following these bastards to their movies, to where they eat, grocery stores, where they're going on dates? These school board people walk the earth as if they're doing nothing wrong. Why aren't you in their face? Maxine Waters said it. So how about you go to Lifetime Fitness? I'm on the treadmill next to you. But so I don't think the parents are mad enough. And so that leads me to believe that people are still sleeping. They're still foolish to believe none of this matters. And I think that they're going to be rudely awakened. And I'm certainly glad to be on this panel with you guys.
Wow. Well, thank you, John. That was beautiful and very passionate. I mean, Joshua, you're like there nodding and shaking your head, pretty much agreeing with everything John's saying in terms of the people being docile and not caring. I mean, what's your point of view on all of this?
It's really simple, man. If people would just read a little bit, they would know what the hell's going on. But it seems like in today, like asking people to like read is like asking a baby to solve calculus. It's just really bizarre. It's like, get off the YouTube documentaries and actually, get 3 different sources on this subject. Like, if people read the Protocols of Zion, if they read the King James Bible, like, in my opinion, this is turning out perfectly to the prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Like, seriously, we got the Prince of Meshech over there in Russia coming in. He's only one body of water away from crossing into that prophecy. And now we got everybody going against Israel. This is getting dangerously close to the prophecy of Ezekiel. And those who, do the occult research know that the prophecy of Ezekiel is going to be the Third World War. And people who are really involved with the research know that this whole schism with everyone just being dumbed down, I mean, it's for a purpose. Like, it really is. And if you really just want to just people always say, like, all right, give me one book, like, just give me one. It's like, well, if you need one, read the Protocols of Zion, then you will understand who is doing this. But if you need two, read the King James. Like, this is all prophetic. This synagogue of Satan that is pulling this crap off and just shoving it in our face is really just getting tenacious with it. I mean, it's really funny how they do all these moves, and people who, like, know the prophecies and know the scriptures are like trying to like scream at people like, yo, this is happening. But then you get people who are like, yeah, you're a conspiracy theorist. It's like, no, like, I'm coming at this like a Christian. There was one group Jesus warned us about, the synagogue of Satan. These group of rich people who say they are Jews but are not, but in fact are going to enslave the whole world into this global government. I mean, that's how it's all going to be installed. Like, let's get right down to the bare nuts of this all. Like, we know this new world order is about one thing, the Antichrist, installing one man to rule a global government underneath this guy called the Antichrist. Who's going to install this person? It's the Jews and the Zionists. People say, oh, well, Torah Jews and Talmudic Jews are different, and they are. Make no mistake, Talmudic and Torah Jews are very different, but in the end, they're both waiting for the same person to put his temple on Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and according to the Masonic book studies in the Freemason lodges, they're preparing for that to be by 2030. They told all of us in these major book studies over in Los Angeles, it was 32nd and 33rd degree Masons who got invited to these book studies. And they told us specifically by 2030, they got word from the Purple Lodge in DC that temple has to be done by 2030. And if you know the biblical timeline, you would know that 3.5 years before that, that's when Antichrist appears, and then 3.5 years after the construction of the temple, that's when Jesus judges Antichrist. So if that's really the case by 2030, we're only looking at a couple more years and some change. Like, we really don't have a lot of time left. And I think when I heard that in 2020, like, first of all, I'll be the first to say I didn't believe it. No, yeah, right. Like, okay. But after a couple years of seeing what's been going on in Ukraine, and now with this, like, man, like, I'm starting to think they weren't bullshitting me at all, because this is getting so tenacious and it's picking up with just so much speed. Like, they really seem like they're on the clock. Like, ever since the lockdown happened, with everything that's been going on with this whole cultural shift of this whole communist idea of transgenderism. And now it's really funny how the truth has become racist. When you do your research, you're a racist. I think that's a brilliant chess move on their part for this awakening movement. Like, now they made the truth racist. You can't say certain things or you get called a name. I think that's a brilliant chess move. And I'm just looking at everything now and I'm just like, man, I got to go get my ranch ready, because it's just too late. You can't snap these people out of their spell. There's too many people gone, and it's just, there's no saving grace. Just what Jesus told us to do when he said, when the apostles said, what do we do when the Antichrist comes? And when you refer to the book of Daniel, he says, flee to the wilderness and pray it ain't in the winter and you don't have a child, still,
suckling was the word, I think.
Yeah, suckling or chest feeding, whatever. It's just, he just told us to flee to the wilderness. So I'm really gonna listen to that. Like, he didn't tell us to stand up and try to, fight back. He knew back then this shit was in the bag. Like, he goes, just when this prophecy of Daniel goes down and the abomination of desolation happens with that third temple, you get to the wilderness and you wait it out for my return. So that's what I'm going to do.
Wow. Okay, I know Everett's going to have something to say, because Everett has been on the show Blood Money prior, talking about essentially, listening to the Bible, and the Bible says you got to go to the mountain, you got to seek shelter and safety. But before we talk with Everett, Tim, I would love to you basically chased down Bill Gates with a bullhorn, made your presence very well known to him. You know what fascinates me about you, man, is that you're the little guy, and you did huge things. You chased this man down and made sure that anybody that was going to the Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation was hearing you on your bullhorn saying truths about how this jab was dangerous and this was part of a sinister plan. What do you think about all of this?
Ultimately, I'm marooned on a planet with a bunch of revelationists that want this doom prophecy to happen, and so that's just, I think that's what the shackle that is around my ankle is bolted to. Nobody really wants to have a future. Nobody really cares about 100 years from now because they think they're going to die tomorrow, and this end of the world tension that everybody has obsessed over is boiling over, and to the point where that's the only solution that we have is this again, end of the world. So it's frustrating because I don't really see it that way. I see is just that we could move on. The end of the world, we don't really understand when it's going to happen, but everybody's saying the prophecies are happening. So I guess I'm on the same roller coaster as everybody else. It seems to be madness and insanity, and everybody just wants to fight with each other, and there's no real common ground. Nobody really wants to talk about peace. They just want to say that it was written, and so therefore it shall happen. And I don't know who wrote that book, honestly, to tell the damn truth. And the source of spirituality that I have says is that I should fight back because what is being done to the population, at least on my soil, was horrific, and it should be exposed. And the more information that people had was probably a better turn than them just being led off to the slaughter based off of the AI algorithms that everybody has been lashed to through their smartphones, through coffee pot talk at the office. Nobody really gets a chance to get out of that echo chamber, and I think it's mostly maintained by this AI digital machine learning thing that was set off maybe 5-10 years ago, and it is really now just up to full speed because, again, nobody seems to really understand what's going on. They just act as if nothing's happening. But I foresee, just in my worldview, I see all these Americans that fought and stood up for Trump that would not take the vaccine. I see them getting drafted. I see them being taken off the battlefield and shipped over there to slaughter while this all happens. So, ultimately, that's my perspective on this.
Wow. John, it looked like you wanted to say something while Tim was talking.
I just had heard, I went to the Reawakening tour when it was here in Vegas. I have to say what an incredible awakening experience it was. I heard you were mentioning prophecy, the other gentleman, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, Joshua. You were mentioning something that I was intrigued by. I was at the Reawakening tour, and I heard a prophet talking about the book of Daniel. And he talked about in the year of 8, the day of 24, and the year of 23, that somebody would be indicted. The book of Daniel didn't say who, but he indicated that on August 24th, 23, Trump was indicted. I sat there through the amazing Reawakening tour, and it was like prophet after prophet after prophet was giving these biblical references. All is that Trump had some sort of impact on what's going to happen. And I just wanted to hear from the panel, does anybody have any insight on what this means for Trump in regards to next year? Because we're entering into a campaign season. If they would do COVID, there's no doubt in my mind that they wouldn't create a war. But my question is, where's Trump in all of this? Does anybody have any ideas on that?
Let me take a guess here. LW, you want to comment on that?
Well, I think Trump has got his hands full. I listened to him this evening there in Florida and what he was talking about. I think that he's going to project himself as the leader who's strong enough to take this challenge on, and we need somebody who's going to actually have the stones to really get involved and make change here. I kind of agree with Timothy too, where just because it's written doesn't mean that it shall come to pass if humanity can curve that and change. I think God gives us the opportunity to change the way things are. Inevitable is things going to happen that prophecies will be fulfilled and come true. I believe so, but I also believe they can be postponed a little bit, pushed back a little bit. And Trump, he's in a bad spot, in my opinion. I think that this is going to be a lot of pressure for him. And I heard him tonight say, hey, if I was there, this wouldn't be happening. And I believe that to be true. I believe that if he was in the White House at the moment, that we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. Just my opinion.
Wow. Interesting. Do you have Nephi? We haven't heard from you for a sec. What your background? You're Afghani, but you grew up here, right? And
yeah, I'm first generation.
I mean, and I mean, you're fully integrated in the culture, but you do have I guess, a link to whatever the old country. What's your opinion on what's happening in Israel, Palestine? How the Afghani people are reacting to this? How the Middle Eastern people are reacting to this? Where do you think this is all going to go?
Well, but before I answer that, I want to throw in some positivity.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of doom and gloom. Find myself sitting here feeling depressed.
Yeah.
But I want you guys to remember that Trump was never the plan. Hillary was the plan. They even killed Bernie Sanders to get her, and they expected to install her. And so Trump was a deviation from that plan. That's why they hate him so bad. So while we can agree this is a very big plot, it is a huge operation that's been decades and decades in the making, a lot of moving parts, but there's also variabilities that occur. Trump was one of those, and it was a ray of light for us. Regardless, I think the benefit of him having a season where he wasn't president and then coming back to it, it gave people 4 years to think about all the bullshit we were fed and then realize, no, this is not right. He woke up a lot of people. So as we move forward into this theater, there will be some other anomalies, and some of those anomalies might be gifts from God. They might be accidents or whatever. We'll have our other moments where we will enjoy victories and we will enjoy progress. So don't give up hope. At the end of it, we do win. Good prevails.
I mean, since you lighten it up a little bit, I mean, let me drag you down a little bit more now. What about the chance of Trump being assassinated? I mean, a lot of people are concerned that the deep state is so terrified because
I don't think that's a concern. When you're willing to go to that level, you have to think about what would the consequences be. He's one life, but what would happen in this country with all of these crazy MAGA supporters? That would literally that would turn them into something else, and I think they know that. He's not really the head of the snake. That's what's beautiful about what we're doing is here in our group. There's no head of the snake. We all are thinking independently, and if Trump wasn't there, we would still continue in that same course. So it wouldn't change anything. It would just piss us all off.
John, in all honesty, what's your prediction of 24? What do you think we're going to see? I mean, crystal ball, let's pretend you have it. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I do the best I can to stay out of that Washington, D.C. circus. I chose running for a state assembly, state Congress for a reason. It's the people's house. It's where I'll have the biggest impact. My whole entire campaign is go local banks that don't subscribe to ESG accounts, small businesses, local farms, local ranches, local elections, even local small businesses. So I'm anti-big box in a sense. I'm anti-big medicine. I see it as a physician. So I can only really speak to my race. I'm out much earlier. I only lost my race by a couple hundred votes. The mail-in ballots got me. I didn't harvest. I'm going to say I got my ass kicked because I didn't harvest and collect ballots. I will this time. I have my opponent raised $252,000 to beat me, which was double what I had, which means I can do more with less. And I believe when people ask me now, so it's not money, what is it? And I said, no, I saved all my yard signs. I have all my big signs, my A-frames, my billboards are up. So I know how to do more with less now. And I think the people are getting more and more awakened to what's happening. So I hear now where people used to come in and not want to say something when they came into one of our medical offices. Now they're saying it. And I'm hearing it. but it's more, unfortunately, on that Washington, D.C. circus. And I'm trying to encourage people to pay attention to their own neighborhoods and communities. That's really where the magic will happen. Anytime we step outside of who we are, and that's who we are, is our neighbors. It's the people we go to church with, our schools, the people we play softball with. That's where our connection should be. And I think as soon as we could turn off the media, I just proposed a Journalist Accountability Act. I met with NPRI. We need to start holding journalists accountable for the bullshit that they put out. They just run the earth, say what they want, do what they want. They harm everyone, and no one holds them accountable. They go on to the next story, lying through their effing teeth. Yeah. So I wrote an app, a actual act that'll be able to hold journalists accountable. And if once they screw up, then they're pulled off and they can't report anymore on those issues. So I think there's a lot of things that I'm hearing. I don't want to be long-winded, but I will tell you 2024, there's a big surge for Trump. I hate the division inside our party. Unfortunately, in Nevada, we've always had a rift between the state and CCRP and then different sanctions of that. We need uniters. We don't need legislators. We need leaders. We need people. And the most important thing of leader is to listen. There's too many people, and I don't mean anybody on this call, of course, but there's too many people speaking and nobody's listening. And it's like everybody wants to be a leader instead of that first follower. And we got to remember, until we can get a leader that can inspire that first follower and the second follower, we're all standing in a stadium screaming at the top of our lungs, and none of them. I would probably say in 2024, I'm looking to help my state, and not being a legislator, but being a leader for reason, a leader for all of the reasons every one of these people on this call have stated are all the truth. And we need stones. Someone else, I heard say the word stones, and with Courtney on the line, I think it's a good word, but we need big ones. And maybe that, and I don't think especially nowadays with the transition, you don't got to be a man to do it, because we've seen a lot of power in our women of our country and our state. These women are fired up, and I think the men need to join them. I think for too long, they demasculated us and told us we weren't valued and that we couldn't have contribution. And I think we need to get pissed off, and we need to say, no, in my home, we serve the Lord, and that's what we're going to do. And we need to be men again. Everybody wants a rip, but they really want John Dutton. And I think that's what we need. So as far as I'm concerned, in 2024, this fight has just begun. I need all of your help. And this wasn't a campaign call. But if I'm going to whoop ass, I need you guys doing exactly what you're doing, telling people, working hard, being the voice of reason. And I would appreciate any time that you guys, or anybody who's not in town, say hi to me. Come meet me on the trail, because I need you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we need politicians out there, as corrupt as it is out there. We need people out there that are fighting for the truth and what's really happening. I mean, Tim, are you seeing, after all the work that you've done this last 3 years, are you seeing any positive change? I mean, trying to keep it lighter and be more positive. I mean, I know we're seeing essentially just carnage happen in Israel and Palestine, but is there any silver lining here that we've missed?
The silver lining is that the spirit of protest and fighting back isn't dead in America. It's just right now they're just trying to figure out what's the message to put forth that has the most effect. Right now I'm working on a campaign, something called the Million Town March, where I want to take, because we can't go to any centralized location anymore. That's impossible. The feds will be waiting for us. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody's got the money or the gas. I mean, it's impossible. But we can go outside. We can go to parks. We can start being neighbors, like you were saying before. We can be neighbors once again, and we can start informing them just, little by little, and just, small versions. It doesn't have to be 1,000 people. It can be 5. But literally, those 5 people are going to be seen by the rest of them. And in a small town, that gets a lot more sway than it does in a city where you see 15 people and a population of, say, 75,000. It doesn't really have that impact. But, other than that, I definitely have messages sent to me all the time about when's the next event? What are you going to do? What can we do? And so I think it's just we have to decentralize it, but unify, because we have to learn how to be neighbors again in America, or we're going to allow the radicals to take over. And I'm a radical for human rights, but everybody else is a radical for the New World Order, it seems, in a lot of ways. And those radicals, I mean, they can be educated in the streets, hopefully, but if not, we're going to have a lot of problems on our hands, because they have a lot of violence and vitriol. And so we just have to keep our heads in a swivel and keep Jesus in our hearts, but definitely don't give up on humanity. I mean, It's the children. I mean, that's the end goal. Ultimately, is that our efforts protect the children. And I want to defeat. I mean, I don't want to necessarily defeat the New World Order. That's ultimately the plan. But a battle like defeating the CDC, like abolishing the FBI. Those are things those are goals that Americans can set forth and actually accomplish with cultural transformation. We can just shift the Overton window, and then that conversation can happen to where it has some effect. Or we're just spinning our wheels, waiting for the leadership that he's requesting, and he's damn right. America is thirsty for it. The world's thirsty for actual leadership, and if there's not an army of people behind that leader, they're out there by themselves, and they just get swept off to the side. And that's what's very frustrating about this whole situation, is that the base has been so divided by the polarization of this guy, that guy, this guy, that guy, and we don't know who to trust. And and then there you pour lava on it with the religious things, and it's really hard to get that common ground where we just talk about freedom. And human rights once again. So I definitely think that there is a positive way, but if we get sucked into World War IV, we do, and there's nothing we can do about that. But right now, again, we still have minutes left on that doomsday clock, per se, and let's go.
Yep. It's wild out there. My last question, I want to pose this to every single person here one by one, and try to be brief, give a little bit of detail, but try to be as brief as possible. Israel, Palestine, what's the solution? Let's start with John. Why don't we start with you? Well, how would you solve this problem if you were God?
Well,
or king. God might be a bad one, but king, or all-powerful individual.
I think you're never going to end this. I don't really believe there is a solution. I believe that when Trump said a two-fact state where there was two people. I mean, we're Mexicans are here, we're there. We blend Canadians and Americans. I think that there's got to be a two-state front there. You got to let people be them. And I think that when we try to denounce one side over the others, we're the kind of where it comes into getting hairy. So I think that there's no way to fix this other than let both sides be there. I don't think we now should, if we could say one side was entitled to it and the other side wasn't, well, now let's just say you're both entitled and you're going to have to get along and live under the same things, because there's no if I walk into a restaurant and I'm Jewish and I order food, and I'm Muslim and I order food, there's really no difference in who's ordering food, right? There's no difference in the food that I'm getting. But they got to learn to get along. I will say that I think, like Ukraine, in Israel, in this conflict, we shouldn't be involved. I'm sorry. I've been vehemently opposed to this being in Ukraine. I'm vehemently opposed to us sending soldiers into Israel. I just look at that as totally a lose situation for us. Loss of American lives. And I just think that it is a bad. I don't think that they're coming out of this. I think that there's going to be more bloodshed. There was really no way to do this. They need a two-state living environment there. But if that doesn't happen, then it's going to be one side versus the other forever.
Okay. Courtney, let me get your thoughts on what is the solution to this? If you're all powerful, how would you solve this crisis?
Well, I'm kind of in agreement. I don't really feel like there's like a magic wand type of solution. I do think that at this point, the people need to live there. I don't know. Other than that, I have now come to really despise governments in general. So I kind of feel like people should just be, and if like in our country, for instance, federal apparatus were to be dissolved, I think I'd be okay with it. It seems like they breed a lot more corruption, and they seem to be against the people much more than they're doing anything to help them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But what I do know is that a lot of the arguments about like who's entitled to it and whose land it should be, I feel like those are being used in order to incite the passions and create further divide. From my own experience, I have to be Jewish. I have been to Israel. I have a lot of friends I have family who's in Israel. And a lot of them say that a lot of what we see, this is not to say that nobody has, opinions, or that there isn't heightened, passions there either. But a lot of the people who actually live there are the Arab culture and the Israeli culture is very, very similar. And a lot of the people who live there are, and a lot of people are, mixed culture, just like they are here.
Yeah.
Or
On that note, could I
and,
mention something on that note? Because you mentioned how close the Israelis and the Palestinians are culturally, and the Arabs. Cain and Abel. We have to remember Cain and Abel, two brothers, right? It's interesting how, again, Armenians and Turks, culturally, DNA-wise, they couldn't be more similar, but yet they've been killing each other, right? Interesting. It's interesting how that is such a biblical event that keeps reoccurring over history, that we are killing our brothers and our cousins.
Yeah, absolutely. But what is like fostering that, right? They're creating a lot of these narratives that further the animosity. And I think that if people were to start, this is my big thing, if people were to start treating people as individuals instead of creating this identity and allegiance, we were talking about like the World Wars. I brought up Tavistock. One of the things the Frankfurt School did, and again, I just want to remind people, I'm saying this as a Jew, one of the things the Frankfurt School did was to attach Jewish identity to the Holocaust. Now, I will put this caveat and say, I think the Holocaust was an atrocity, and in no way am I condoning it. I do think it was very real, and lots of people suffered. However, it wasn't just Jews that suffered, right? It was anybody who was not part of the goals that they wanted to advance. But to attach an identity to the Holocaust is to create a whole class of people who now see themselves as victims. This is very similar to what they're doing in this country with the blacks and attaching their identity to slavery. Not every black person, has ancestors that were slaves in this country. It's just not, and it doesn't empower them to attach your identity to victimhood. So I bring this up just to say that, if people were to start treating people as individuals and that stop fostering some sort of identity that is your own individuality, we would actually be much more unified as a human race instead of attaching our identity to these different groups that we get labels slapped on boxes, and then those boxes create shields in which we start to fight and compete against.
Yeah. By the way, I noticed we have 107.
Really answer the question. I don't.
No, it totally did. Totally. By the way, we just got 107 in, and I know 107 and I are going to do a very deep dive on this topic. So before we get there, I would love to hear what. Let's talk to Nephi. It's same question. How do you answer that question? If you could be all powerful, how would you solve this Israel versus Palestine issue?
Well, you asked me earlier how Afghans felt, and my dad is Muslim. My mom is Mormon. I grew up Mormon. I have a lot of Arab friends. I have a lot of Afghan friends, Iranians, and I have a lot of Jewish friends. And what I love about all of them is that our cultures are very similar, and they all smoke hookah. But the problem is when, we can smoke hookah with Arabs and Jews in the lounge, but every time any one of those groups leaves to go to the bathroom, they start talking smack about the guy that's back at the table, and vice versa. And it's, being Afghan kind of in the middle because we're not Arabs. It's difficult because they're both beautiful cultures. I love everything about both of them. If it was up to me, I would make sure that they were all forced to smoke hookah together, because no one can not love each other
when they have
hookah.
You're awesome, bro.
Pass the peace pipe.
LW, brother, your thoughts?
Well, I'm gonna piggyback a little bit on what John said. I think this goes back so far. It's hard to know who's right and who's wrong. And when you start picking sides, I think that causes a lot of problems, but it puts me on the fence because I'm old school. I think you just, when the kids, get in an argument at school, you just go behind the schoolyard there out on the playground, you just let them duke it out, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a cowboy. That's just the way it used to be. And, but I'm on the fence because if America allows Israel to duke it out with Palestine and we're not there to support them, then what does that mean for America down the road? Are we going to get in a situation with Russia or someone else, China, and since we allowed them to duke it out on the playground, Israel's going to do the same thing with us? Well, hey, you let me duke it out with Palestine, you duke it out with China or whatever. So I don't know. It's kind of a 50-50 thing for me there, whether we help or not help.
Yeah.
Vam, can I point something out before I forget?
Sure, go ahead.
When you look at the propaganda that immediately started, they were all using American anecdotes. This is our 9/11.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're doing that because they're trying to they're playing with Americans' emotions and trying to bait us into this conflict.
They didn't get the memo that half of America thinks that 9/11 was an inside job. So like they're basically saying it's just like 9/11, inside job, you know?
Good point.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I don't think this was an inside. I don't think this was like, Israelis doing an inside job. Do I think that potentially they're okay? Like compare it to the United States of America. Right now, there's a lot of people within our government that I believe are treasonous because they are closing their eyes to the horrors happening at our border, human trafficking, all kinds of nonsense. Right? When we were talking to Michael Yon, he was saying that same class of individual, treasonous individuals, are within the Israeli government. That's why he said the jab was basically a concentration camp and a needle. That's the way he called it. He's like, why would you do that to your population when you went through a Holocaust? Therefore, his assertion was that there's bad people within that government, just like there's bad people within our government that do not necessarily cater to the rights of we the people. So, Joshua, I think you're the only one that hasn't spoken about. What would you do if you had a magic wand, crystal ball, almighty? How would you fix this problem?
Well, I'm going to start that with quoting Julian Assange, who said, "Forget Russia. Israel is the true enemy of America and the Israeli lobby in Washington, D.C. So if I had it my way, I'd make Palestine the way it was before the Zionists came in, because before that whole Zionist flood came in, if you read your history books, the Muslims and the Jews that were living there and the Christians, they weren't fighting. They weren't duking it out. It was really peaceful there. There wasn't this tension there. I would get the Zionists out of there because honestly, through the Balfour Declaration and for them to claim, oh, this is our land from 2,000 years ago, it's not right. It's an apartheid state. And if you know the war crimes that this Zionist faction has committed since World War II, when they first went into Israel, it's atrocious. I mean, I really think that this Zionist faction is the whole backbone of the whole global deception. I am a staunch Christian. I follow the scriptures intently. I look at the prophecies, and we were warned about this synagogue of Satan from our Lord Jesus Christ, and that's exactly what this Zionist faction is. And
you're saying the Jews are the synagogue of Satan?
No, the Zionists. Big difference between Torah Jews and Talmudic Jews. The Torah Jews, who are the true Jews, who worship Jehovah, those are the true Jews. These Talmudic Zionist Jews, they're not even Jews. They say they're Jews, but they're actually Luciferians who are been accused of blood libel for hundreds of years throughout Europe. And they got kicked out of Czechoslovakia. They got kicked out of Spain, England. Like, this whole Zionist faction has been accused of just horrific crimes, and they have been proven to be true in court. I mean, look at how many canonized little children were made canonized saints through the Catholic Church because they were victims of this Jewish extremist group of Zionists from all their blood libel rituals. It's atrocious. I mean, I just really feel that in my bones that this Zionist faction is the whole backbone of deception, the whole backbone of the problem. I think if we just returned the land of Palestine to where it was before this whole Zionist flood came in 1947, I think it would be very peaceful and we wouldn't have the problems we have today. And if I had it my way, that's the way I would go about it.
Well, that sounded like Mein Kampf.
Mein Kampf. Have you even read that thing?
Yeah, that's he was anti-Zion. Yeah, very much.
Yeah, well, yeah, he knew the truth about the banking system. He knew the
Yeah.
truth about this group of people who are hiding behind this group called Jews as a human shield.
Yep.
I mean, the protocols of Zion, man, those are just, people say that's fake. And it's just like how people say the Bible's fake, but the truth is always revealed by the results. Prophecy is coming true in both the Bible and the protocols of Zion. Like these points, I mean, they are just laying it out. And if people really read that book, they would just look out their window and be like, oh my goodness gracious. And I think this guy, Juan, who just came in, who's showing his boots, this guy used to know my dad, Larry Abraham. I think he went on David Rodriguez's
I was going to mention
show.
that, Joshua.
Yeah.
Your dad and I were very good friends.
Yeah,
and,
you went on David Rodriguez's show. I was a couple days after you. But yeah, it's just, I'm looking at the protocols of Zion. I'm looking at the King James Bible. And it's kind of like, you know, these are two different books to the same coin. They got two different sides of this coin. And it's just really alarming to me how people are just so emotional over this issue instead of just educated. And this is kind of why I'm going to follow what Jesus said and just get off the grid, because there's no hope in snapping these people out of this spell. Like, I mean, when the truth in the past, like 3 years when Biden became president, the truth has apparently become racist. And when you go at it like that, like pretty much my fight has ended. I'm done doing interviews. I'm done doing all this crap because people are just, they don't want to read books. They don't want to look into these things. They just want to look on TikTok, social media, listen to what their TV's saying instead of investigating for itself. Because I'm seeing the prophecies come forward. I mean, especially in the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you look in the book of Baruch and the Apocalypse of Abraham and the Apocalypse of Thomas, I mean, they give pinpoint accuracy to this time that we're living in, how this time of the Antichrist is going to start with a global pandemic. Then it's going to start with wars all over the world. And then we have this prophecy in the book of Baruch of the attack at the Shadim that the Masons always talk about.
It wasn't a global pandemic. It was a scamdemic, but yeah.
Yeah, scamdemic. That's even better. It's a total scamdemic. And I just really, I'm looking, I mean, everyone's got their different tactics of how they're going to go about this. I'm sticking to the prophecies. I'm sticking to the scriptures. I'm going to do what Jesus said, and I'm going to hide out in the wilderness until he returns.
Josh, I respect that you're very informed and educated on these issues. My question is, do you believe that the average person has the mental ability to separate those two issues and not view what you just said as anti-Semitism?
Of course, if they would read books, that's the problem.
They won't.
It's like asking a person to read a book these days is trying to tell a little baby to split the atom. It's really fascinating to me. It's just, if people would
I think you did a good job. I'd like to start interrupt. I think you did a good job. I was not aware there are two different factions of Jews, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
So I know that. I mean, you put it in a good way. I think you did an excellent job of describing it, because and how you did it would be, I think, beneficial. I'm glad I will share that information myself.
I mean, if you look at the Torah and you look at the Talmud, it'll blow your mind, dude. The Talmud is the most God-forsaken holy book that I've ever studied and read. Like, I've read the Quran 3 times front to back. I've read the King James twice front to back. And I looked into the Talmud. There's like 36 different volumes. I mean, you got to do it. It's a lot of reading, but if you give an overview of the Talmud, it's really, really nasty. Like the way this Zionist belief that came from Babylon, they actually call it the Babylonian Talmud. This book that has taken over the synagogues these days, and they've turned their back on the Torah, it'll blow your mind what's in there. It's actually really demonic. And I know for a fact that there are two different factions. And if you look at Israel today, the Orthodoxes are button heads with the Zionists. They're like, dude, we're not even supposed to be here. What the hell are we doing here in Israel? We're not supposed to be here until the Mashiach returns.
Yeah,
so,
what you're saying, it's interesting, Joshua, because I grew up in Hollywood, and what you're saying, if you had said it 5 years ago, it's like I would have probably been like what Nephi's saying. Oh, this is like an anti-Semite and stuff. And it's interesting because I actually started hearing what you're saying through Torah worshiping Jews about that conflict that exists, and some of the questions you brought up. And really, what we're here to do on Blood Money on America Happens Network is really, we don't censor this stuff. Everybody's got a point of view. That's why we had, almost 10 people on this show, each with their own point of view, because that's what freedom of speech, freedom in the media is about. We need all these different point of views. Whereas what I see the mainstream media doing is they would never let somebody like you on, Josh, to say your point of view.
Dude.
You know what I
Hell
mean?
no.
So it's good to have these different point of views, and we certainly appreciate
I get
what
kicked
that
off
brings.
because you're.
Yeah, well, I lived in
just
Beverly
kicked us
Hills
off.
off of Rodeo.
Hey, Juan.
Drive.
Sorry. 1 second.
No,
Juan, can you hear
it's
me?
not your fault. I
Hey, Juan,
stated that wrong. The internet kicked us off.
Oh, sorry.
For whatever reason.
I don't think he can hear you.
But you
I
got
don't.
back on.
Hey, Juan, could you hear me?
Well, it came back on last time.
Just mute his mic.
I'll mute his mic. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, Bam, is
it's
that
just
is that like?
I lived in Beverly Hills for 6 years, man, and I'm telling you, like living in Beverly Hills on Rodeo, like I was around a lot of Jewish people, and they told me the same thing. Like, there's a big difference between Torah Jews and Talmudic Jews, and I was surprised how many Jews I met in Beverly Hills who were just so against this Zionist crap. They were telling me, they're like, man, we're not even supposed to be there. Like, we stick to the Torah in this group. But there's other rabbis that I met who swear by the Talmud, and they're very interesting people. I mean, these guys, with the Talmud comes the Zohar. With the Talmud comes the Kabbalah. Like, there is a lot of different things that unfold out of the Talmud, like this Jewish mysticism that is really, when I looked into that really blew my mind. And especially when I was in the Masonic lodges over there in LA, and how I realized all of Masonry is derived from the Kabbalah and the Zohar. Like with you got the Talmud over here and the Torah over there. They're very different groups of people. With the Torah, you got very peaceful, loving people, but with the Talmud, you got a lot of racism. They straight up called me a goyim. They're like, oh, you're a sheep, you're a cattle. The only reason why you live is to make my profits bigger. And I'm just like, whoa, like, where did that come from? But that's what I noticed with the Talmudic faction of the Jewish faith. They look at non-Jews like the only reason why we're alive is to make them more profitable. But when you get over the Torah side, they're much more accepting. Like, they don't care if you're not one of them or not. They just want to coexist. But not with the Talmud faction, man. That is probably the most racist group of people I've ever met in my life. Like, if you're not one of them, then you are just nothing. They call you goyim, you're a cattle, you're a sheep, whatever name they got for you. It's pretty nasty when you get into these Talmudic factions.
Yeah. Juan, could you hear me?
I can, and I apologize. I've got poor internet where I'm at, and so and I've got an airplane flight just a few hours that I've got to get ready for, so I don't have a lot of time.
Sure. I want to dive into it with Juan, guys. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask him some questions, and then we could all, if you want to hang out and continue the conversation. So Juan, I would, let's just dive right into it with you. We've had these gentlemen on the show for the last hour or so in terms of the Israel versus Palestinian carnage that is currently happening right now. Let's go right into it, man. What is your point of view on what's happening? How could you enlighten us as to why this is happening? Why is it happening right now? Why is it happening to the degree it's happening? How did the intelligence not see this happening, where you have, groups like the CIA, Mossad constantly monitoring this stuff? How did this happen? Why did this happen? What's the reason it happened?
Okay, let me two quick things. One thing is probably my closest friend literally is Muslim, and out of Libya. I'd trust him with my life. He'd trust me with his family's life. I didn't have the foxhole together. I would never think twice of whether or not I was, he had my back or I had his. That said, we have very, very, very different views in the religious realm. And, but because of that, we've also had some very deep, important conversations. about God, the nature of God, the conflicts, and there's different factions within the Muslim faith that come at things a bit differently. And so, but being able to at least have the conversation and have a truthful one, that's a pretty big deal to me. I've enjoyed that. We consider each other children of the book. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the five books of Moses, and then things kind of break off from there. But part of the important thing there is that we can disagree very precisely, directly. He's 5 times a day on his prayer mat. He's a very spiritual person. But we do see things very differently. We're able to put that aside a bit and still be friends on other levels and have the conversation, which I think is a critical component here. A lot of people don't think the conversation ever happens, but it does. One of my friends, Harold Bredesen, is the guy that actually was befriended by Sadat in Egypt. And as a result of those conversations, and because Harold was also friends with Begin, Harold became the go-between for what became the peace talks that Egypt and Israel reconciled after the 73 war, and came up with the return of the Sinai relationship and trying to work together. And that's the reason, by the way, that Sadat was killed. Muslim Brotherhood killed him, assassinated him, because in the course of understanding that the Muslims believe that Christ is a prophet. They just don't believe that he's the Son of God or the Messiah. Jews have a similar thing. They're looking for Messiah still because they don't believe that Christ was the Messiah, but they don't necessarily deny that he was a prophet. That's one of the things, like Joshua's dad. His mom was Catholic, as I recall, and his dad was Jewish. So he grew up in a very, he got it from both directions. And that's part of what led to his amazing intellect and way of looking at the world, in part when he and Gary Allen did the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And then later I helped fund, I think I was the sole person that funded his second book, which was Call It Conspiracy in the 80s. And but out of those kinds of conflicts is one way of saying it, but those different fabrics of life, you get a much richer understanding, even of just the basics of faith. Why do you believe the things you do? How does it work? And then in the course of, having those understandings, does your faith lead you to some twisted, perverted version of it that allows you to kill people in the way that the attack happened on Israel? Or does it lead you to some coexistence where you may not agree precisely, but you find reasons to be able to work and live together on the way to, finding God, if you will. And Israel at this moment, the part that's tough, they were hit with a very real, a horrible horror, a terror, with the murder, the assassination, the destruction, the horrors of war, and then taking these prisoners and the way that they've treated them. No sense of just basic human decency, if you will. The part that's not really being discussed in the public yet, Hamas has said that Iran helped coordinate the plans for the attack. With what's about to happen to the Hamas group there in Gaza, they will be completely eviscerated. They will be wiped out. Gaza will be an occupied area for many years out in the future while it's restructuring and building. It's going to be very hard for Gaza, and there's lots of people that weren't good with this attack, were not happy with it. You asked about, for example, foreknowledge. Egypt warned Israel 10 days in advance that the attack was imminent. They warned Israel a year ago that plans were being made for this type of an attack a year ago for the same holiday, and they were monitoring activities for a later attack, looking at the various holidays, looking at these exact dates for an attack. They were warned 3 days before the attack by Egypt, specifically, as were a number of Western countries. Egypt warned the United States, Britain, China, Russia, that this was imminent. Iran was in on it, and that it was going to happen, and they gave them the day it was going to happen and the methods that were going to be used. Raise any hand visible to protect.
Juan, you're kind of cutting. You're cutting. No, Juan, you're saying. I know you're saying amazing stuff, brother, but it's getting cut out really bad. Like last 10 seconds got totally cut out. It might be a good idea if you log out and log back in, because it's pretty bad.
Happens to a lot of live streams when they start getting over the target.
I love hearing Juan talk too. I mean, he brings such an intelligent perspective to this whole thing. But,
yeah, me too, dude. This guy knew my dad way back in the day, dude. Like, that's awesome. Like, he was on David Nino Rodriguez's show a few days before I was, and yeah, apparently he knew my dad, and yeah, he's really a smart guy.
So, I mean, Josh, could you quickly, for people that don't know, could you talk a little bit about what your dad did, the books that he wrote, how who he worked with, so people understand your background?
Yeah, well, my dad, Larry Abraham, wrote the book that basically started the whole global Illuminati resistance and truth movement. None dare call it conspiracy. It's the most sold book to this day in the realm of the occult about mentioning the Illuminati or the New World Order. I think it's like over 20 million copies now since its publication in 1971. And it was basically the book that was the first, to blaze trail and to warn people about this New World Order. And yeah, it's ever since then, it's really given a lot of, it was really ahead of its time, because in that book, it talks about how the Bolshevik Revolution was funded by Wall Street, how this whole Zionist movement was all funded by Wall Street and from people in the United States, while at the same time they're all preaching better red than dead. It's only like 157 pages. The first book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy. The second one is a little bit bigger, and the third one, which is my personal favorite, The Greening, like that was my personal favorite. But yeah, it's like a little 100.
And the greening is all about how they're going to use environmentalism to basically bring tyranny.
Yeah, it's my dad finished that one up after Agenda 21 was all buttoned up, and in that book it really goes into the truth about this whole environmentalism, all the way back to the staunch, seed root of it all, which is the Iron Mountain Report, thought up by the Club of Rome and Aurelio Apeche. And how this think tank, the Club of Rome, thought up, hey, like we need to bring about a global enemy, so let's have mankind, be the enemy. And I love it how in my dad's third book, he, because I grew up on Saturday morning cartoons. That was the age I was at while he wrote that thing. And he mentioned a cartoon that I was watching at his house when I would visit him on the weekends, called Captain It wasn't Captain America. It was Captain Planet. That was what Captain Planet. How these 5 kids get these rings from the goddess of Gaia. You know, earth, wind, fire. You know, water, and then spirit. You know, which are not coincidentally, are the 5 elements of witchcraft. You know, it's really funny how my dad put it all together. That was my favorite one because in my dad's 3rd book, that was the only book where he actually quoted the King James Bible and related it to his research. He didn't do that in the first 2, but he did that in the 3rd one, and that was a really cool little touch that he did because you know, when people talk about this new world order, and my dad slightly glanced and touched on it in his 1st and 2nd book about the quote unquote satanic conspiracy. But, you know, that's exactly what it is. It's just this whole Luciferian faction that is just hiding behind this group of people causing, I mean, in the Protocols of Zion, it says, like that was the book in 1903 that first mentioned the term New World Order. Like that thing was published in 1903, and it mentioned this term New World Order to have this guy, this one world ruler who is a descendant of David, who would come from the tribe of Dan, to install this global government ruled under him. And this is what they talk about in the Protocols. And when you know that, it's like, wow, I heard about that in the book of Daniel and the King James, you know, like I heard about, you know, the bad shepherd in the book of Zechariah in the Old Testament as well. You know, this is all biblical. I mean, people, you know, when they talk about this new world order, you better get into that Bible because that's where it all comes down to. When you read the Quran, you know, it talks about how the Muslims will one day take over the world, but it doesn't talk about a global government. I mean, it warns you about the Imam Mahdi of what we know as the Antichrist. And then you read the Bhagavad Gita and the 4 Holy Vedas. It doesn't mention that. You know, it does mention it in the Old Testament, and it does mention it in the Protocols of Zion. Like no other religious books really touches on the real true root of the problem. But if you read the King James and the Protocols, you're going to have a complete, rounded, good understanding of what really is going on.
Awesome. Juan, you got disconnected right when you were getting into how Egypt warned Israel multiple times. I guess 3 days before they were warned a year ago. They were warned 3 days before, and then it got hazy, the connection. So we could resume
well, I
from there.
apologize, and who knows how long it'll last here. I've only got a few minutes left. By the way, just you know, I haven't talked to Patrick in years, but your brother Patrick is the one that. Your dad and I were down in Panama together, and he come off of his work on the Enterprise, where he was a deck officer. And then I was the one that told him, you really ought to stay here with your dad, learn some of this stuff directly right there, and you'll pick some stuff up. And so he did. He stuck around, found a girl that was whose dad was pretty influential. And then, of course, the coffee plantation stuff and like that. Patrick, great guy there, and he did learn a lot. Decided to stick around with your dad on that stuff.
Yeah, I haven't seen my brother Pat in a long time, but I heard he's living up in Gig Harbor now. That's pretty cool that you know him too.
Oh yeah, and he finally had you know, he decided to come back north again and come to America again instead of Panama. But
yeah,
and of course that's where your dad liked to hang out. In fact, when I would visit up there. When you'd come over, that was when he had the place. You go right in past the post office and go down the long drive, and it was down at the end of the drive there, over the water
Wanna
there.
Beach and Purdy, over the bridge. Yeah, that's where he wrote the 3rd book, The Greenie.
Well,
that's when I used to hang out in his little study and play with my toys while he was writing his book.
Well, the thing I was going to say to you, so I have an original draft that your dad did, and the reason the greening happened the way it did, the little background that you may not be aware of. When I finished the stuff I was doing in Russia and right in that window, the negotiations for Gorbachev to step down in Russia and get the hell out of Dodge, he went over to the Presidio in San Francisco Bay there, and that's where he presided over the set up the work for the Green Revolution, the Brits coordinating with them and him with the Brits both to Rand Corporation here and to Tavistock over there. And so, I was the one, I believe, that told him, this was the green agenda that they were going to push then. And
Nice. That's very
this is
cool.
the Green Man thing. It goes back into Pike's thing, where the green ink that he used when he wrote Morals and Dogma was in dedication to the Green Man. And of course, that's also when Eve was beguiled. One of the names of Satan is the Green Man. He hid amongst the green leaves of the garden. And so, in having those conversations with your dad at that time, I said, this is all about everything green, and this is the greening of everything. Their version of a garden mentality. They want to get back to the garden, and where they're in control and like that. And so we had a number of very good talks as he was doing that, because I had in that time period too. He was struggling a little bit in that era, and part of the thing that's so cool about your dad was when they came out with None Dare Call It Conspiracy. It was actually your draft. He did the whole entire book, but Gary Allen had more prestige within kind of the community. And so it was a higher profile person, but he liked what your dad had wrote. So with virtually just a tiny handful of modifications, he put the co-author thing, he had the money to kind of pull it off, and that became None Dare Call It Conspiracy. But ultimately, he really wrote that book. But what was really cool was they then went out to college campuses around the country and eventually around the world, and they spoke to college students, and they explained what they had. They made the case for an elite that was trying to take over the world and do it through the business world. And your dad had the attitude, and he talked with money people. You can't beat them. You have to understand where they're going. They're so big. They're so embedded. This is such a huge conspiracy that if you try to fight it, you're just going to get plowed over. So you have to find a way to understand what it is, get in there and get control of it as much as you can, get a place so you stay viable, and then try to fight your way out of it. And from the politics and like that, there's just so many little stories. Gary North or Ollie North had was doing kind of a truth tour around the country, and your dad kind of dove in. We supported him with some of the stuff, and there was issues there, but it wasn't because these weren't true Americans. To try and get people to re-understand things that several generations have already understood before, even in the spirit of Smedley Butler, who was a Marine, said war's a racket, and like that. It was a pleasure knowing your dad. I wish he wouldn't have smoked as much as he did. He did have to look over his shoulder a lot because he was constantly getting attacked. Even mentioning the Jewish situation. Look, he was as Jewish as they get. You get in the right crowds. Yeah. He was not an anti-Jew, but the ADL and Spotlight, which was big at the time, which was really kind of a, they had great articles because they had great sources, but the reality is they were really a cult as far as I was concerned. I'm even avoiding certain words. That was really a problem child. And so your dad had some security issues like that, which I helped address at the time. And that was part of the reason eventually that he moved from that place over on Wana to another spot there in Gig Harbor that was a little bit more secure. And that was the other house he had on the other side of the hill there. But, it brings back so many memories for me. Sometime it'd be fun to show you some of those early manuscripts that I have, because I was financing some of that. And he always was able to get things to where he may not have paid back the day he was hoping to, but it always came around. It was beautiful to have got to do some business with him, and he was a very straight arrow guy. And you know, the one piece of art that your dad commissioned himself, that if I could pick one thing that he had that I would personally want to make a copy, he had an oil painting copy made of a lamb
I
that
remember
was
that one.
bound
Oh,
for
yeah.
sacrifice on the black.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. And
I'll never forget that painting.
he was not as spiritual, I don't believe, earlier. And I think that, you know, look, his name wasn't Abraham for nothing. You got plenty of siblings, right?
Absolutely. I'm the last of 11. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, he was way more spiritual. I think that goes into conversations that he and I had. He began to see the world in a much more in a different way than he did, say, in the mid 80s. He became much more aware of the spiritual side of the battle that we're in. And and of course, the patriot side tied to the spiritual side, tied to the history of America from the spiritual side, the captured nature of America from the spiritual side. And that's things I remember about him that stick with me even now. And even the tying to slime him as though being upset with a certain political crowd, even into Israel, to equate that with being anti-Semite or anti-Jew, you know, his dad's Jewish, you know, it just was ridiculous. He was trying to make a point that, you know, and we get the same thing today. They're trying, you know, if you're a Trump supporter, well, you're a terrorist.
They're actually trying to not draw the distinction. Like, they're trying to say if you're anti-Zionist, you're just anti-Semitic, like all throughout, you know. And it just really strikes me as like, I just can't understand why my dad didn't see it earlier. Because when I woke up to it all, that's instantly what I realized. It's a spiritual battle. So I ran to the King James, you know.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think he did see it. He was trying to not let it hijack his messages and where he was going. He wanted to stay in a business lane, wanted to make a buck and help others make a buck and stay viable. And of course, that's why I left Chile, spent the time in Panama. He was looking for a new beachhead, you know, because of what was going on in the country, and then ended up back here. There was nothing better than what we have here. I mean, there's so many different things that come to mind in all of that. Just spurs lots of memory. Let me transition back to the situation in Israel, where you guys are actually at for the conversation.
And get my contact information from Vem for sure, dude. I really want to hear from you after the show.
You know, this is awesome, by the way. This is one of the coolest moments we've had on Blood Money. The fact that you know this gentleman's father and the history that you're talking about. I mean, I'm just I got goosebumps all over the place. I got to tell you, because it just shows you how long this has been going on, who's been in the fight, and really wonderful that you guys have such a rich history back there.
Well, and it's and there's so many of the guys that I knew back even to the 60s, let alone the 70s and the 80s. And first time I met Larry was in 74. And that just tells you how far back that we had a contact communication, and all the people around him. Was one of my guys, one of the old guys that had been around forever that introduced me, and so lots of fun relationships. But going back to Israel, the issue is this: with all these warnings, of course they knew this was coming. Why didn't Netanyahu, why didn't the Israeli Defense Force, why didn't their intelligence people react and anticipate and head this off.
That's
They
the
had
sauce,
actually
trick of the
pretty
trade.
They
precise
needed an
warnings.
excuse. That would
Yeah.
mean
Well,
they needed an excuse to go
that's-
after them.
Yeah, that's what Mossad does, man. Victory through deception.
Say it correctly. Let's imagine for just a moment, and remember, the first warnings from Egypt were a year earlier in the same holiday period. So they had been kind of baited that there may be an attack and it's coming and it's going to be in this period. We're not certain. They got warned a year ago of a variation of this. They didn't do anything and it didn't happen. Now, here they're getting warnings again. They're much sterner, they're much more intense. But the question, if Israel had preemptively gone into Gaza, had done some airstrikes, it would be very hard to go in on the ground in any kind of force, other than a little bit covertly, which is very dangerous to not just personally physically dangerous, but dangerous because you could blow things up and have a Floyd moment, if you will, and get the population all riled up and stir the pot in ways that you just don't want to. Imagine, though, had Israel decided this is a serious threat, we're going for it, and gone in, then this Biden administration, other NATO members would have castigated them and cut off all supplies. They would have called them thugs and brutes, and that this was an unprovoked attack. The people in Gaza would have said, oh, we never planned anything. That you're so wrong. And, those devices that they use to fly in with these air devices, no, that was just a new lawnmower design. Honest, it was okay. And they'd have done whatever they had to do. Israel would have looked like the thug, and they'd have had their supplies radically. The other side of the coin is Israel was also not 100% sure, and this is also not known, not understood, if the attack was fully coming from the Gaza side only, or the Gaza side exclusively, or if it was coming from the Lebanon side and or the Lebanon side exclusively. That's still the threat today, and they weren't sure, and there was turmoil inside of IDF and other things. So if they had acted to be more preventive, it would have, if they acted half-heartedly just a little bit to try and do it, the whole thing would have blown, and this whole thing would have been portrayed as Israel's fault. It's the same logic, love it or hate it. It is precisely the same logic as was exercised at Pearl Harbor.
Absolutely.
We had lots of intelligence.
Absolutely.
They knew it was coming. They knew why it was coming and everything else. Roosevelt had campaigned on not getting into another war in Europe, not getting sucked into a war in Asia. And that was his campaign promise to the voters. He wasn't going to do it, wasn't going to sacrifice our young men to that. And America was in a very anti-war stance. They still had a huge distaste with the veterans and everything else to the way that our guys were sacrificed on the altar of a European, dust up. And when we got sucked in, it took Pearl Harbor and again collusion with those fucking Brits to try to get us into the war to do it. And the same issues coming here today. And by the way, even when you get into a Zionist version of the concerns about Israel, ultimately, that's not a completely accurate way to say it. It's not actually a Jewish thing. It's the royal families out of Europe and out of the banking centers in London that have been coordinating this all along, whether you're talking Russia and Lenin and Stalin, or you're talking the Zionist operation into Israel with the banking families led by the Rothschilds up in London. And it's not, that's the name, so it's easy to go after Rothschilds. Most people have no concept. That is just the cover name for a whole bunch of families that all believe that their bloodlines going back to the tribe of Cain, Cain and Abel, and they have adopted literally this personage of being Jewish, etc. Some of it, some of them are genuine. I mean, I've met several. One of the members was actually a very close friend, and we had very difficult conversations, and passed away under very unusual circumstances many years ago. That many believe was the family taking him out because he was even asking questions within his own family. So with all of that said, what lies ahead for Israel? The problem is they said they're going in 24 to 48 hours. They made a huge stink about it. They're moving slowly, even though it's said to be quickly, 250,000 troops down to the border area there with Gaza to go in and do a door by door. But they're using the air power to go in and take out the known sites that they have problems, and where rockets were launched from and all that. They've cut off the power and the water. So it's going to be a difficult situation. But the other side of the coin is they're not going in there quite as quick as they said. It's a little bit of a bait and switch, because they know they could get sucked into a two-front war in a heartbeat. And while there was a lot of missiles in Gaza, they didn't have a lot of fuel there. When Beirut was blown up, they had the aluminum nitrate, the fertilizer, and that was being refined for the rocket fuel. When they shipped the rockets over from Iran through Syria and elsewise, but predominantly through Syria, when they were shipping those rockets through, they don't ship them fueled. They're not, you can't ship them that way. You got to ship them raw. And then the fuel is made locally. Well, they were making it there in plants. They had purchased refining operations out of Germany. And they had an underground area next to the port where they were refining that fuel and then taking out small loads at a time in pickup trucks. And so when you saw Beirut blow up, you'll notice there was two explosions. There's a first explosion that dispersed the aluminum nitrate, the fertilizer, and it kind of got a cloud. It got oxygen in amongst all the particles. Then you see a second explosion that's like the spark plug, and that's from those underground facilities where they had this highly refined fuel that was getting ready to be shipped, and the refinement facilities, and it literally blew 60 feet underground. It blew up through those vents. And
well, let me ask you this one. Let me ask you some. Do you think that with the Israelis going down into the Gaza, do you think them invading that is going to spark the whole Arab Brotherhood, whether it be in Egypt, Iran, Jordan, Pakistan? Like, do you think it's going to spark the entire Muslim Brotherhood to retaliate? Because I just feel that, how you were saying earlier, that they knew that this was coming, but that's a total, that's the way Mossad rolls. I mean, they're not going to waste a situation that they could, exploit and make a better gain out of. So, yeah, if they knew about it, let's wait on that. Let's do it so we can manipulate the situation the way we want it. But it just seems like if they go into Gaza, what it tells me is that they're just trying to get the whole Muslim Brotherhood to ignite against Israel. And totally bring about what Albert Pike and Giuseppe Manzini wrote about in their plan for the Third World War. It's going to start off East and West, but then it's going to evolve into the Zionists versus that whole Arab nation and all their allies. So I just want to ask you, do you think this invasion in Gaza is going to ignite that?
Well, I don't. It could certainly spread, but that's the art of what they do next. First of all, again, had they gone in preemptively to try and nip this, and then they'd have had to escalate, then it would have looked like a Muslim brother or the Hamas was just responding to aggression from Israel. The reality is that they could have got sucked in last year, and the argument is that there was a feint going to happen. The reason it ended up being the last day of the holiday is because even when Egypt was warning him 10 days out, 3 days out, there is a school of thought that, and I had General Staff on the phone this morning, friends, we were kind of going through this that have worked in that region, including Jordan and like that would game these types of scenarios out, over the last several decades. So these are not school kids. If Israel had taken the bait with these warnings and tried to do anything preemptively, it's likely that they would have had their aid cut off because they would have been perceived as the aggressors and misreading the situation, chumming it along, trying to make more out of it than there was. Because look, in that region, there's always some kind of preparation going on for some kind of action against Israel, as a defensive thing. They've got themselves in that mode where it's so defensive all the time. So if they had gone and done and acted first during the holiday, they'd have been the bad guy, including for aid going to Israel, which they have to have. They've got to have that military and other aid. Remember, the largest lobbying group in Washington, D.C. is the Israeli lobbyists.
Yes,
the second largest
Julian
lobbying
Assange
group in
said it was the
D.C.
most dangerous thing.
Well, the second largest lobbying group in D.C. is the Saudis. And so with that in mind, then the issue then was, does Israel act prematurely? Does that end up costing more lives? Does the situation de-escalate? Because you don't know the rest of the story behind the scenes. They've got spies, they've got agents, they've got people behind the scenes negotiating. It'll be a year or 2 or 3 or 5 before we hear the rest of the story behind the scenes. They may very well have had intelligence that may not have been obviously accurate, but was going on that was telling them that they were going to be able to diffuse this without it actually going live in this way. In the spy world, it's like, is it Normandy or Calais? Who was trying to deceive who bought whoever's lie? There's a lot of twists and turns to this. So I'd be very hesitant to throw any stones. I was supposed to go over during the scam-demic. You guys were talking about it a minute ago, and I remember, and I was going to talk with members of the Knesset. I've been invited to come over, but because of the shot stuff and all that, I couldn't get there. I was going to take a cruise in there, and they were going to require me to have the shot. And I said, well, I'm not going. I'm not taking that stupid shot for anything. And it was being pushed hard. But you had, just like you had here in the U.S., you had factions that were absolutely adamant, like Zelenko and others, about that you cannot do this. This is a crime against humanity. And you had other people inside that were absolutely adamant that you had to do this, that, there was no way that we could trust not to do it. And remember, the largest population inside Israel right now is Russian Jews. So you got Russians all through there. It's the wildest thing in the world from all these different angles. So moving forward, what's the situation for Israel? I think that, and it could change in a moment. They could start sending those troops in like they said they were going to, or do some forays. But I don't think, even though they're threatening it, that they're actually going to go in force immediately. They're going to let their aircraft do what they got to do. They're going to be under the threat of invading any minute. Hamas and all the people there are going to get worn out, starved out, need the water and the food, and that's not inhumane. That is probably more humane, because going in and going door to door, unfortunately, you probably end up actually getting a lot more people killed. It may sound good, but the other side of the coin is also, once they commit, it's very hard to pivot. They're better off holding a wall, a siege wall, and cutting off supplies, and then negotiating through and letting the other guys think that they're negotiating with these hostages to get what they want. In the meantime, they're not opening a door for Hezbollah and what they've got. And the reason I mentioned the rocket fuel, Hezbollah has more fully fueled all of those rockets that they have filtered into Lebanon. Less of that rocket fuel
Juan,
got into Gaza.
I gotta cut you off for a minute though. I gotta to get off this show. I gotta take care of some stuff. But please get my contact information from Zem. I'd really like to talk to you after the show. Please, thank you for inviting me on. I hate to cut this short.
Oh,
I got been over 2 hours. I gotta take care of some stuff. So thank you everyone for having me on. Have a great night, and I'll talk to you soon, Juan.
All right, super, Joshua.
Juan, could I ask a quick question? Yeah, okay. So I'm wondering about this Saudi peace deal, right? So it seems as though, and tell me if I'm deciphering this incorrectly, is that it seems as though Hamas would have the most to gain by interrupting that peace deal that was in progress. Oh, Juan, you're cutting out again big time. I can't hear a word you're saying. Oh no, Juan, your audio's cutting out big time, brother. If you could log out and log back in. Sorry, it's we can't hear a word you're saying. It's very everything's getting cut out. So if you could log out and log back in. In the meantime, Nephi, let me pick your brain about this.
Okay.
What do you think about the Saudi peace deal? So there was a Saudi peace deal in progress with Israel, and it seems as though Israel would have benefited from that because, once you have a peace deal with the Saudis, you already got one with Egypt. There seems to be a lot of upside for the Israelis of having that go through. Now, with these Hamas attacks, the retaliation, the public opinion of the Saudi people, that might actually thwart the peace deal. So I was wondering, from in that equation, Hamas has the most to gain from having this had gone through successfully. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that people are theorizing that the Israelis actually let this happen. Wouldn't that be counter to their objective of getting the peace deal happen? Or I don't know, how am I reading?
Well, I want to reflect back on where conflict in the Middle East started as it relates to Muslim countries where, Islamic law did not allow for non-Muslims to even set foot on, kingdom soil. Then they found out they had oil and they needed some white guys to show them how to pull it up. And so their local populations were very angry at the kings and the princes because they were violating, Islamic law by allowing these non-Muslims to be on kingdom soil. And that's how you have those compounds that were formed. They said, well, we'll just limit them to these, little areas, these little islands of, where it wasn't considered haram.
Haram is, what does that mean?
Forbidden.
Okay, different than harem, which I guess is
how I aspire to live my life, is to have a harem, which is haram. But regardless of what they decided to do, and they continue to do it, that didn't change the way the general population viewed their own government or their own kings. Violating or finding a way to skirt around it. So I would draw that back and say, just because the Saudis are entertaining peace talks with the Jews, that doesn't change every other Arab country's views on that, and it's the same kind of thing. You're making exceptions to Islamic law. You're compromising. And so what was the objective the first time? Well, the Saudis found a way to make a lot of money, to make themselves very, very, very rich. So I would ask the question, what do the Saudis have to gain? Not what does Israel have to gain, but what does the Saudis? Because they know they're going against all other Arab nations by entertaining these kinds of discussions. So either it was a ploy,
like they kind of had something to do with the attack in a way, in order to basically stop their own deal from happening and be able to save face. I mean, is that what you're saying? Or?
Well, I'm saying beware of the okey doke. Like, the thing that confuses me most about conflict in the Middle East is how we had, I don't know, 17 terrorists that were identified as being from,
Saudi
Arabia, and then we wind up in Iraq.
Yeah,
like the disconnect is just maddening to me.
But that also tells you about the absolute pathetic ignorance of the American people. Like,
they don't know geography at all.
It's so bad. And you know what? How do you blame the American people when you realize our education system is intentionally teaching kids to be idiots, uneducated, not reading real books? I mean, how do you? That's what they get into.
That's what they do when they want to turn you into a slave. Is they start messing with your ability to access information and education. So I would say that that deal probably was never designed to materialize, but it would be designed to manipulate perceptions in a way that would be beneficial. Like the Saudis in the Arab communities, they're considered the uppity Arabs. They always used to come to my hookah lounge and demand that I made it and not the white guy I had hired. And they always ordered double apple, which we nicknamed double asshole. I mean, there was a guy from Saudi Arabia. And then they did every sin that was haram that they weren't allowed to do while they were in Vegas. And I think that kind of hypocrisy is not unbeknownst to other Arab countries who might be a little bit more fundamental about Islamic law. But with the Saudis, I don't expect that they legitimately intended to do that.
Okay. Intending to get into the peace deal, you're saying?
There wouldn't. You could say there was a peace deal, but every Arab in every other Arab country would just disregard it.
Really? Wow. It's so interesting, man. Hearing this kind of insight, I hope the viewers appreciate what you're getting here. Like, you guys have, your mom was Islamic, your dad was Mormon?
Other way around.
Whatever. I mean, talk about a wide spectrum. You know what I mean? This is what we need in this country. We need to have these conversations with people that know things that are not necessarily in our everyday lives, like what's going on in Afghanistan. How is the population made up there? What's the rest of the world look like? All that informs us to be able to make smarter decisions than, the ridiculous thing of hey, we got a war on terror. Afghanistan attacked us, or Saudis attacked us, that are living in Afghanistan caves, but then we're going to go launch a war on Iraq. It's like, if you told that to, if you're reading a history book and you read that sentence, you're like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And we let that happen because we're ignorant, because we don't know what's happening.
It's by design, right? Our schools are not schools. The reason the government's running it is because they want to control the output. There's indoctrination schools. A lot of dumb Americans don't understand Afghanistan was never our enemy. We were not at war with Afghanistan. We were at war in Afghanistan. Because when 9/11 happened, and we invaded Iraq the first time, everyone responded in Muslim countries like, "Hey, we want to go fight in the jihad," which they would say we started, and their countries were like, "Yeah, go." And then they ran out in the middle of the desert looking for a fight and realized that we were across the pond. And they tried to come back to their countries and they weren't allowed back. They were told they were terrorists.
Oh, wow.
And that's why they all collected in Afghanistan. Now, if you want to know what Afghans think about Afghanistan right now, you might not believe this, but they would say the Taliban is doing a good job.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Right. It's not what you would think. Just like Iraqis would say things would be better with Saddam.
Yeah.
Because the agendas that we go there, we say we're fighting for freedom, but we're not. We're fighting for capitalism and oil.
Yeah. And you never know what
the cover.
Yeah, you never know what other people's lifestyles like. I mean, we just have a complete screwed up barometer in terms
because it's never about freedom and democracy. That's the cover for the Jack move.
Yeah.
I mean, our country. I love our country, and I love it because of what it's the possibilities and what it stands for. But we are scoundrels, man. We've jacked just about everybody of everything they have. We find somebody that has something worth taking. We keep the press, focused on. We're going there to spread democracy. We're going there to spread freedom. Which is a great idea, only there's a bait and switch involved, and it never happened. That's why we keep losing conflicts like Vietnam, is because we go in there with this stated agenda, and then we work another one on the side. So the original agenda obviously fails because our attention isn't on it. But, whatever it is they went in there to get, they get it.
Yeah. So Juan 07 is back. Juan, before we continue where we left off at, one of the viewers is asking where you make your art.
Oh, actually, that's Jennifer, my wife.
Oh, wow.
And she's done all of that based on stuff that we've done. And so, the presentations I did is Trump is the Magador and fighting the deep state bull. And that was over a year and a half ago that I did those presentations. The called.
It should be a snake.
Well, the crew that we're going up against, these Luciferians, they actually, it's Baal and Moloch, and they actually are worshiping Baal and Moloch. Remember, Hillary, in the emails to Podesta, said that when she was losing to Trump in the polls and like that, she sent the email back to Podesta and said she was going to have to sacrifice a chicken to Moloch, which in pedophile language that the FBI has identified, chicken amongst the pedophile crowd is a young boy. And so, and then Moloch, of course, depicted as the bull in these occult symbology. So the devil has 1,000 names and symbolic presentations. He presents as both male and female. That's why you have the Baphomet is half male, half female, because the devil presents Isis one moment, Lucifer the other, Osiris, back and forth. He presents both ways. And so there's lots of symbology that is there to depict this Satan, Lucifer, the devil, Green Man, Samael, goes by 1,000 names. And from a scriptural side, God himself, he's got a lot of names in the Bible. It calls God is the breasted God. Well, he brings the mother's milk for the children. And so there's a lot of things where when you start looking at it, you have to kind of take a deep breath and go, okay, maybe I didn't quite fully understand some of the concepts or imagery, even from a Christian church, Jewish, or even a Muslim faith. And so there's room to have those discussions and some interesting stuff there. But yeah, anyway, I hope that answered your question. Before we lose the connection, let me just finish saying what I was started to say a moment ago. And that is what I would hope people would take from the conversation today is that it's not, at the end of the day, as much about Israel versus Hamas, or even Hezbollah, or even the Western powers with what they're doing. Ultimately, what this is really about in this particular specific instance is Iran. Hamas consulted with Iran and planned the attack with the aid of Iran. You're watching chess at 5 levels. What happened just days before this attack was launched? The Biden administration authorized $6 billion to Iran in various types of aid that, of course, they've made a big thing about the fact that that aid can be pulled back. It wasn't cash like Obama gave them, blah, blah, blah. And what we're going to hear over the next weeks and months was they knew that there was coordination into the region and that Iran, they were trying to get Iran to behave itself and to call back and step down. So the reason that aid package was allowed was to get Iran to not do what they were going to do in aiding Hamas. And then Iran will claim that they had tried to get Hamas to kind of stand down, but it was all Hamas that did it. And they went forward, with this plan and blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, the real issue is this. It's not even about Israel versus Hamas and Iran. In a crime scenario, you ask yourself, who benefits? Does Hamas benefit? Hamas is going to be wiped off the face of the earth in the Gaza area.
They're a patsy.
They're going to get decimated. They're going to get ripped to shreds, and they won't get it done instantaneously, but over time, it's the Israelites with this, the verbiage and everything about what transpired. They won't really have a choice but to be very thorough. I don't think they'll go at it as fast as they've portrayed they will. They're speaking one thing and going at a different level to keep the other guys on point because they have this ongoing real threat with Hezbollah to the north, which is better armed with more serious weaponry and much more dangerous. It's not even about Iran, Lebanon, or Hamas. Well, what could it be about? Who benefits? Does Iran benefit? Look, the Air Force could very well be working a plan right now to take out some more of their sites, nuclear sites like that. But Israel understands at the end of the day, if they cause the Arab world to unite by overstepping, which is part of what Iran's plan is. Look, Iran has, like a chess game, multiple scenarios. If the Israelis do this, we got this. If the Israelis do that, we're going to go this direction. If America steps in this way, we take them there. And we get them bogged down with Russia. And China's got their angle. This is world-class spy shit. Everybody looking at the right angle, and they're all kind of balancing out what happens if we do this or that. It's not chess on one level. It's chess on 5 levels. Now you step back. Here's the 24,000 foot view, 24,000 mile view. What is the real benefit of what happened here? In a magician's act, you have to get the eyes on the pretty girl with the plumage sticking out of her butt and off of her hair and the short skirt and showing plenty of chest. You've got to have the flashbang explosion. You've got to have the poof. You've got to have the sleight of hand happen with exacting precision. Not the exact second explosion happens a second after. Because you have to give their head chance to recognize the explosion, be dazed, turn their head and look at the origin of the explosion, and then while their gaze Just for an instant, that's when the hand trick happens. That's when the magician does the sleight of hand, does the little maneuver, and you didn't catch it, you didn't see it. What's going on? The most dangerous thing in the world for the group that we're actually fighting, that group out of the city of London with the banking. Remember, what was the origin of the fight against Trump with Russia? It was the dossier brought out of the city of London. It was not the British as a people, but that cult, that group, those bloodlines operating out of that center, that square mile, that orchestrated the dossier, Russia, to distract America as though Trump was a foreign agent of Russia. The Halper, not Jan Halper, the professor at Cambridge University, going after Mike Flynn with a fraud about having a tryst with a Russian agent. The professor from Cambridge, who was also on the payroll of Department of Defense here in the U.S., $500,000 a year, while he's a professor at Cambridge in London, who was a spy in the Reagan White House for the Bush crowd, who had one of his aides, a student aide, prostitute, wannabe spy, try to get Papadopoulos in bed. Aid in getting an inroad into the Trump campaign with money, by the way, an oil deal out of Israel. He went to Greece and then he went to Israel and they offered him money, and then they were going to stop him at the border coming into the U.S. with more than $10,000 because they pushed some cash on him, and he gave it to an attorney in Greece. When he got to the U.S., he didn't have enough money to push him over the money law, more cash into the country than he was allowed. It's that Brit operation. Even here, the Brits are trying to orchestrate using Israel, Hamas, and Iran to take the attention off of Washington, D.C., where their operatives are being exposed, where I said this is the year of the whistleblower, and it's been that so far. But now the gaze is turning from Ukraine to operations that the Brits have a hand in related to China and Asia, the BRICS operation, various other things in the money world. They don't want Washington, D.C. and the American people watching what's going on in Washington, D.C. They'll do the budget crisis again, 33 days till the budget crisis flares up again, even though we've got an agreement for who the speaker will be, but it hasn't been voted on yet, even though you've got all sorts of other dramas. Look, we're only, 11 days in to October. There's things going to happen over the remainder of the month that are going to shock you, including the counterpunch that sets a different tone for what goes on from here on. So those globalista, the Davos crowd, Club of Rome, Atlantic Society, all the various arms of the octopus, World Economic Forum, that put 10 billion into Ukraine to start the civil war over 10 years, to foment war against Russia in favor of the Brits, who gets to control Europe, who gets to control the oil supply and gas supply to Europe. They didn't want the pipeline. Hirsch writing this story as though it was America that blew up the pipeline, when Putin has been very adamant the whole way. It certainly wasn't the Americans. They might have assisted. It was the fucking Brits that blew up the pipeline, because they're the ones that didn't want that energy coming into Europe to challenge their supply of energy where they make the big bucks. Got to get the enemy right. Israel and Hamas and even Iran are pieces on a chessboard. And they're being moved by globalista to try and stop what's coming, that's being orchestrated, that the crowd, the ones that invited that guy right there to run, have put together for the comeback here in America, and the takeover and the stopping of this military industrial media banking complex that has captured America. When people say America did this, America did that, and we're doing all these horrible things, no, America didn't. The people who have hijacked America, who've gotten control behind the scenes, who've stolen America through false votes and murder, who have taken the soul of America for their own purposes, they're the ones that are doing this. The problem for the American people is they haven't had a chance to regain control of the helm of the ship that was perfected all the way back when President Kennedy was killed, and is part of this fight back that we're involved in right now. That's why it's Trump fighting the deep state bull, this Baal Moloch crowd. If you go look at the imagery, the symbology of Washington, D.C., it's all built around this occult themes that are the families that have, captured control of America going back all the way a couple of hundred years ago. So don't be mystified, deceived with the illusion of the magicians. Israel's being used. Remember, where did Israel come from? It was founded in this early current stage with money coming out of the city of London from the Rothschild family, that's just the name of the most visible of the families. The names of the rest of the families you probably never even heard of. And they're the ones ultimately pulling the strings further back. And they're using Israel to fracture the alliance in the West to make an opening for their globalist New World Order and take it out. And the group that's countering that, including in certain segments of the military that only have control of a portion of the military, not everything, are using the legal authorities of the person that they helped get in power as the president and now commander in chief of the United States to get to the position where they can take these people out of their positions of authority, including wielding the wealth, the military, and the business, political strengths of America to their purposes. And we're fighting to take it back, in part with getting an honest vote once again, or stopping until we can get an honest vote, which is the pause that's coming, that's not that far down the road. Israel is about a lot more than just Hamas. They're pieces on a chessboard. Ultimately, the focus is right here in our own country, Washington, D.C. I'll let everybody chew on that. I appreciate the chance to be on the air. I've got to get ready. I've got a flight here just very shortly.
One quick thing, it seems like we came full circle in this episode, because in the beginning of the episode, I referenced this documentary that we have playing on our America Happens Network channel about how this entire crisis started. And it seems as though all roads to tyranny lead to the British at the end of the day, even present day United States is still plagued by essentially the British, looking at us like we're some sort of slave state that they can control.
Well, that again, even though we don't have time to get into it greatly today, the only person on the planet that has legal title deed authority to take the throne in Israel as a sovereign is Prince William.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And that goes back to the Balfour Declaration in the small print, which says that the British royal family retain the legal authority to place a sovereign on the throne at will. If you have some type of a major dust up in the Mideast when it happens, which I think is still several years out, it's not this one. This is not the time. Then the only person that actually fits all of the criteria, you hear is Erdogan and Turkey. Bullshit. Has to be a Muslim. Look, in the British royal family, they claim that they have ties back to Muhammad. And within their bloodlines, they claim ties back to King David. And they also claim ties back to Jesus. Rex Stoix, Christ didn't die on the cross. He went and had kids and like that with his wife. all sorts of various things. So at the end of the day, they claim to be related everywhere, and they include to be related to the aliens through the Cain family, because Lucifer was a alien landed on the earth with the 200, and so they claim heritage to everybody and the right to rule by blood. What's the largest country in the world right now?
Mass, isn't it Canada?
No.
Mass size?
No.
Africa?
No. The British. The British Commonwealth.
Yeah,
hiding in plain sight. If they sink America like the Titanic, and the symbology is very important, who fills the power gap out across the world?
The Commonwealth, yep.
Why do they want Russia damaged so that they can control Europe? Their entire plan, even the whole Pike perspective, etc., is based on collapsing America, creating a power vacuum. And it's just like the buildings on 9/11. It's just like the assassination of President Kennedy. They didn't have one hit man there. They had a half a dozen, because they could not have a failure, no single point failure. When 9/11 happened, it wasn't just one method to bring the buildings down. They had 4 different ways to bring the buildings down if necessary. And if for any reason the primary, which worked, didn't accomplish the task, they had others that were in place to bring them down no matter what. That's the situation with the world. They're coming after America. They're not coming after Israel. Hamas isn't coming after Israel. Iran isn't coming after Israel.
Hamas is insignificant.
Coming after America first, and then they'll deal with that. So, gentlemen, I've got to fly. If your folks haven't seen it yet, this is the coin that we have that has the imagery Jennifer had there with the Megador, and it's beautiful. It's very detailed. And then Trump with his arrest photo. You can get that over to jennifermack.com.
Gorgeous.
And Gumroad too, by the way.
Awesome.
And then we're having a lot of fun with this art Jen just did. 2020, it's not over yet, which is really the key to the whole thing. Before it's over, 2020 is not over. It drives liberals completely insane to think that Trump's coming back in any major way.
Yeah.
But enjoy the show, folks.
Thank you so much, Juan. It's always amazing to have you on the show. I think we could wrap up the show too here. Nephi, thank you so much. By the way, Nephi has a brand new show that's coming on the America Happens Network. Do you want to talk about that real quick, Nephi, before we wrap?
We can, but I wanted to say that in the beginning of this conversation, you said if I had the ability to make one wish and fix everything, I was thinking maybe it was time to use this. But after this conversation, I'm going to get hookers with this wish.
Oh, man.
So, yes, Double Tap Show is gotten a facelift. You can see, part of the sets doesn't show real well on the internet, but we're going to be talking about guns and gun laws and changes and things that are relevant to, protecting ourselves, which is our responsibility. And in Vegas, it's one thing, but it's not no longer a Vegas show. It's now broadening to more national issues with guns and self-defense.
Well, what's your tagline? It was guns and what was it?
Serious gun talk.
Serious gun talk. That's awesome. People are going to love that. We're all about the Second Amendment here. I mean, honestly, that's the only thing that has protected us from becoming full-on slaves until here. But they're trying to.
How do you like the set?
I think your set's dope. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, you guys the viewers out there. I mean, this is going to be a really funny show. I'm really excited about it. You did your set like, well, how would you describe it? I mean, I don't want to say the word.
I blended the two things that I love the most is America and my culture.
Awesome. Awesome.
So yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Awesome.
So, great show, brother.
Yeah, this was a great show. Let's wrap it all up here. So for the viewers, thank you for joining us for this episode of Blood Money. This has definitely been a very interesting episode. A lot of great information. I highly recommend that people watch the documentaries that we posted today on the America Happens Network channel on Rumble about the Palestine-Israel crisis, the history of it. We need to know what's going on. I mean, we one of the things that occurred to me throughout this whole conversation is the amount of damage we could have prevented to this country if we're all not ignorant about what's happening in the rest of the world. I mean, purely out of ignorance. And it's unfortunate that we've learned about the Middle East through wars, because I think people know a lot about Iraq today, a lot more than they did 20, 30 years ago in terms of the Shiite, the Sunnis, and all that, the conflicts, historical conflicts. And we got to learn what's happening in the rest of the world, because our government really swindles us, and they use the media to swindle us, unfortunately, and get us into a lot of trouble.
The media is part of our government.
Yeah. And this is why we started the America Happens Network, by the way. That's why you have guys like Nephi and I, working on getting you guys honesty and the truth about what's going on there. I also want to thank Travis Ebarb, our producer at America Happens, the America Happens Network. Want to thank Mindy, who's always producing great content. I'm sure you guys have heard there was a incident that happened at one of these grooming places with Mindy getting attacked by some LGBTQ dude, and then Spencer getting handcuffed and arrested for doing nothing, basically, where the guy that was assaulting Mindy, is a male assaulting a female, they didn't even touch hands on him, and then for Spencer, who's standing there like this, just trying to stop this dude from causing harm to Mindy, they go ahead and arrest him. And that just shows you systematically what's happening. You know what I mean? Like, their mind is already wired to go after, the toxic males, as opposed to the guy, the LGBTQ guy, that's doing the real assaulting. So it's really important to check out some of the content that we're going to put out on that topic. Travis has been editing a really cool documentary that's coming out soon about that topic, a short documentary. And then want to thank Corinne from the America Happens Network, to our entire team, Aisha. And I'm going to roll that introduction, the countdown that we put in the beginning of this episode. I'm actually going to roll that on the outro, and then, our little sizzle that ends every episode. The reason I want to roll that is because of the imagery, the heartbreaking imagery of what is happening out there. And I highly encourage, if nothing else, if people can't sit down and watch this 3-hour-long episode, they should watch that 2-minute intro, because that shows the carnage that is happening, carnage that must be stopped, because this is just going to be endless carnage. It's going to lead to nothing, no resolution. It's just going to lead to more hatred, and then probably the destruction of the entire world if the entire Middle East decides to join forces with the Palestinians. We're basically talking world war. So anyway, Nephi, do you want to say something lighter on the way out, or do you have something clever you want to say? Or
I already said something clever with my genie.
We got the genie. All right. All right, guys. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode. We're going to roll the outro now. I will see you on the next episode of Blood Money, and make sure you check out Nephi's new show, as well as all the other shows we have on America Happens. Oh, and special thanks to LW too. Almost forgot LW. LW with daily devotions every Monday to Friday, every morning, a prayer series with LW of Liberty Warrior Nation. Make sure you check out his show. I will see you all on the next episode of Blood Money.
Witnessed as they've been walking through these different houses, these different communities, babies, their heads cut off. That's what they said. Gunned down, families completely gunned down in their beds. You can see some of these soldiers right now comforting each other. Many of them reserves who jumped into action, leaving their own families behind as well, not knowing the sheer horror that they were about to come to. They say they've never experienced anything like this. This is nothing that anyone could have even imagined.
infamous Albert Pike letter to Mazzini, known as the Illuminati Plan for 3 World Wars, was allegedly written by Albert Pike in 1871. The letter outlines a plan to foment 3 world wars in an attempt to take over the world. It is claimed that the letter was on display in the British Museum Library until 1977, but the British Museum denies this claim. Some suggest that the use of the word Nazism in 1871 proves that the letter is a fraud, and others say the same about Zionism. But Zionism existed back then. Zionism was made official in the late 1800s as a non-religious nationalist movement, arguing that the Bible was proof that Jews had a lawful claim to the land of Palestine, an area that was currently inhabited by a population that has lived there relatively peacefully for centuries. Around the alleged writing of this Albert Pike letter, Jews began immigrating to Palestine with the intention of someday creating a state of Israel, which did not happen until 1948, after World War II and the creation of the United Nations. Albert Pike joined the Fraternal Independent Order of Oddfellows in 1840. By 1859, he was elected Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite's Southern Jurisdiction and remained Sovereign Grand Commander for the rest of his life. He was definitely aware of Zionism, and if this Illuminati plan is true, then his use of the word Nazi is plausible. Either way, the letter is worth a read, and the closer we get to the end game, the more accurate this letter appears to be. The Illuminati plan for 3 world wars. The First World War must be brought about in order to overthrow the czars in Russia and make that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by agents of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. After the war, communism will be used to destroy other governments and weaken the religions. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and political Zionism is strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough to balance Christendom, which would be restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of Islam. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam and political Zionism mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economic exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere, the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization. And the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. Whoever wrote this letter had the vision to see where this is all going. By manipulating our beliefs and emotions, mankind has been herded into these wars like cattle to the slaughter. Reporting for InfoWars, this is Greg Reese.
Truth truth in media is not free. If the corrupt corporations run the media, then all we get is a pile of lies. So please support truth in the media by donating to AmericaHappens.com, by simply going to AmericaHappens.com, clicking on the support tab, and entering a generous donation. Thank you so much.
Check out the America Happens Network, because Fox sucks now.